I would like to recall this Board of Education meeting to order. It is Tuesday, May 10th, 2011. Thank you for joining us. The board has been in closed session since 6 o'clock this evening for the purposes of employment of employee. Would you please join me and stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. First item on our agenda is public comments. I understand that no one has signed up to address the board this evening. We will move on to board committee appointments. We have several committee appointments to make. Board members have been contacted and have graciously agreed to serve. The policy committee will be chaired by Maria Hirsch, and her committee will consist of Shannon Ebner and John McDonough. Thank you very much. Our LEND representative is going to be Karen Stufen. Chris Bloom has agreed to serve as our SACED Board of Directors representative. The IASB delegate is going to be filled by Maria Hirsch. Thank you. Our Lizadro Museum representative will be Shannon Ebner. And the City Park School representatives are going to be Jim Collins and John McDonough. Thank you all for agreeing to serve on those committees. As I said to you earlier, there will undoubtedly be other opportunities to serve on ad hoc committees and perhaps standing committees that we will form once our new superintendent gets here and helps us with that. The next item on our agenda is board governance. This is a little different item. Let me just get my... What I really wanted to do here was just have an opportunity to talk to the new board members about a couple of items. One of them, and a very important one, is how we want to handle new board orientation. We have, as you know, 4 new board members. We have lots of things to do. Shannon had shared with me something that Ellen Walsh had sent out to the new board members, I guess even before you were seated, that I had copied and put at your places tonight, which were a couple of sample agendas that we could use. We can go about this in any way we want to. We have a number of things to accomplish. We want to make sure that new board members are as fully understanding of everything that goes on in the school district and the way in which public education works in Illinois. We have a district identity to try to come to some agreement on. That is going to be something that we will want to do with our new superintendent. We also have a governance process that we're going to need to agree on. One of the things that I've been suggesting to people is perhaps we would like to do this over a number of meetings. One of the first could be a sharing of what we have heard out in the community when we were on the campaign. I know that you have heard lots of things. You went to lots of coffees. It was a very engaged campaign, and perhaps you would want to share with the rest of the board things that you've heard. We could start to identify some themes, some common themes that we hear out of those things. We could do this in a series of meetings if you wanted to. Ideally, we would do this when the superintendent was here so that we could have the benefit of hearing everything that you have heard. We can do it that way. We can wait. We can get started now. We can do this in some ad hoc committees if you want to. We could take just the understanding of the district and public education. We could do those in separate committees, which would then be brought back to the full board if you want. So what's your pleasure? How do you want to go about this? We have lots to do. We can work on, we can have Saturday morning meetings. We can do whatever you want. Shannon.
I would like to have 2 or 3 meetings before the new superintendent starts on July 1st. We have a lot of work to do, and we can start working through what our vision, what our focus, vision, and mission is. Start talking about 2 years from now, what do we want to say that our board accomplished? I want to talk about our philosophy and belief statements from the policy manual. So we can start doing, I'd like to start doing some of those things before the new superintendent arrives.
Anybody else? Karen?
Yes, I concur with Shannon. I would like to do those things. I would like to have, some retreats, even before July 1st, so that we as a board, a new board, can come together and socialize some of the things that we heard during the campaign, as well as all of you as existing board members. You hear from the community, and you know what we want to accomplish, and so that we can gel as a board leadership team, and we can synthesize that information, assimilate it, and give Dave the highlights. I know that when we work with him, we're going to have some very good discussion in more detail, but I think that we can start our work as soon as possible. So 2 things, one with respect to that, and the second is with respect to having one of those retreat sessions be gaining knowledge of the District 205 from a philosophical standpoint, and understanding all of the departments and the whole organization better, so that when things come to us that we can truly have very educated, informed, decision-making process.
Anybody else? John?
Are we talking about the thing, are we talking about that type of session that's authorized in the Open Meetings Act, where you bring in a representative of an organization? It's for establishing norms and practices. I'm just wondering what the thoughts are for having something like this.
We can do a number of things. When we as a board sit down to evaluate ourselves and start to talk about our own board goals, I think board goals are something that we can do with the IASB, our Board of Education goals, not district goals. But when we talk about how we're going to work together as a team with the superintendent, and when we evaluate our, please jump in.
For purposes of going into closed session, John, if the board wants to do a self-evaluation, then ISB comes in, and it's part of that self-evaluation conversation. Can be the beginnings of the conversation around identifying board goals, but then that would be done publicly. That would not be subject to closed session. But the board goal setting piece is not an exception to the closed session, so that it's done in open session. And you certainly could have a facilitator from IASB come in and help you with that process. But as the board works to, does its own self-evaluation, that work can be done in closed session, and have those candid conversations about what you think your strengths and needs are as a board in terms of the big theme things that Susan was talking about. But it can only be done in the presence of a representative from the Illinois Association of School Boards. It cannot be done without them being present. So that can happen. So if you identify themes, your strengths and your needs, and it's usually done off of a document. It's so early in everyone being seated, but it could be baseline data if you wanted to engage in that process. And at least you would have some baseline data to begin to have some common focus to begin and start the conversation. That could be a strategy to begin. But that could only be done with IASB if you want to do that in closed session. So that's where that would begin, and it would follow up with the open session of the validation of what the board goals were. So that would be a little bit of what that process should look like.
Where does something like a Myers-Briggs inventory take place? Is that an open session or a closed session type item, or could it be either, depending on what we were going to do with it?
I think I think we'd want to get some technical advice from the Illinois Association of School Boards to say, does that really fall under a board self-evaluation, which I don't think it would. It would just be identifying the various leadership and personality types amongst the board, and that could not be, I don't believe, is a closed session item. You'd have to actually reveal yourselves to the entire community about where you sit on the Meyer-Briggs spectrum. The cabinet will take bets on where you all sit, and then you fill it out, and then we'll see how close we are. So we can save you that time. We'll do it for you. No, I'm teasing. But something like that, you would certainly take privately, but the discussion of that would be something that would be done publicly, because it is not really a board self-evaluation. So it wouldn't be subject to the, it wouldn't be an exception to the Open Meetings Act.
John?
Just wondering if your thoughts are, would you want public participation? Could this be done in a workshop format where we could do this and invite public participation at the same time? Is that something?
Open session?
Well, participation, more than just open in front of the public, but with the public involved.
Mrs. Hirsch?
I have a lot of thoughts on board orientation and getting us all started. I want to start off by saying that I think that we're, as an individual board member, I'm re-energized by the 4 brand new board members who are dedicated, interested, and ready to dive in and to start attacking the district's business. And I think that is a very positive thing. I think I concur with Mrs. Ebner in terms of, I think it will behoove this board to spend time, even before our 8th team member arrives in town, to start having discussions around how we want to conduct ourselves as a board, how we want to govern the district. If I flip to conversation B, governance team process basics, it's talking about, to whom is the board accountable? Does the board understand its role and job? What does it understand its role and job to be? What's the role of a board member? I think these are some things that would be very instructive for all of the board members to have a conversation around. It appears to me as though this could be a conversation that could be actually conducted with some facilitation from IASB in a closed session, so that we can have some candid conversations about what it is that we see the challenges are and what it is that we see we want the end goal to look like, and negotiate that and come to some kind of way that we can figure out to interact with each other, communicate with each other. I think there's a lot of work that this board should be able to do in closed session. With that, I think that there is a wholly appropriate set of committee meetings or workshop meetings that should be conducted in open session, where we are talking about what the vision is for the district moving forward and how it is that we see the district moving forward. And I think that would be a phenomenal conversation to have at the board table as to how we invite the public in to discuss that. I think baby steps, we need to figure out how we want to conduct ourselves and what our values are and how we want to govern as a newly seated board. And one of the key components for me personally is to better engage in public discourse and have public input. And that would be an area where I think it would be appropriate to ask for public input in terms of ideas on how this board could do a better job of soliciting feedback from parents, from taxpayers, and I think that would be an appropriate place in the series of things that we're looking to do to invite public input.
Mr. Collins?
To throw my opinion in here, I think there are several legs to the stool. First of all, to become educated about the workings of our own district is one. A second is to understand what the best practices in education are today is the second. And as part of that, develop kind of a common vocabulary. I think as we have had discussions one-on-one, I think what I've walked away with, we're all talking about the same thing. We're just using different vocabulary to get there. And if we adopt a common vocabulary, I think that will increase the efficiency of our communications. Thirdly, we need to understand what the role of a school board is. And I'm just throwing this out as an idea. I have a book that came highly recommended to me titled The School Board Field Book. It is recently published by Solution Tree, written by Mark Van Clay and Perry Sodwell. We could get a copy for every member and almost kind of run it like a book club. Talk about 5 chapters per meeting or something like that. Because it's a pretty thorough book about what a school board does and how it does it effectively. And then the fourth leg to the stool is, I think, getting to know one another and trusting one another and really making ourselves into a very high-performing team. I think our community and our children will benefit from that.
I agree with all of the things that are being said here, but I would caution you not to run away without our leader. For example, when you're talking about a book that we should all read, I'd like to have our new superintendent suggest a book that we all read and talk about with him. I'd like to see the best practices in education, a dialogue between our new superintendent and us on what those are. I think I just have to say that the best thing that we can do with our time right now is what you 4 are going to do. You're going to, I believe, a 3-day workshop on school boardsmanship, covering a number of different areas, I believe, in June, right? That's going to teach you a lot about the role of a board and how good boards work. But when we get down to our district, we need to understand what has happened, what is happening here, and then we need to move forward with our new superintendent. So while I think it's fine for us to talk about what we've heard on the campaign trail and try to identify some themes so that we can, as I think you, Jim, said to me, take these themes to our new superintendent and say, here, now in your first 90 days, do these ring true? You know, is this what you're finding out? He has a whole schedule laid out for himself as to what he's going to do in the first 90 days to orient himself to our district. But I would hate to see us going in opposite directions. We are going to be most highly effective if we work well with him. That's how it's going to work best. If we go off on our own and come up with things that then he's put in an awkward position of saying, well, yeah, that could work, or yeah, sometimes we measure that, but here's a really much better way to do it. I mean, I don't know. He is the professional in education. I want him to lead us and help us help him. Now, of course, we're going to do whatever you want, however you want to do it, but that's my advice and my 2 cents on this at this point, that we could best spend our time learning about the Department of Special Education, the Curriculum and Instruction Department, you know, how things work at the high school, how things, I mean, it's all laid out in some of these sample agendas that you have in front of you. But you tell me how we want to do it, and we'll do it that way.
I mean, I think we're talking about 3 things, right? There's how our district works, the Department of Special Ed and whatnot, and we have to get educated on that. We're going to the board, the boot camp to understand the technical aspects of what we're doing. The governance side of it, though, I think we need to get all ourselves on the same page here. I think that we need to agree amongst ourselves how we want to govern ourselves, and we need to also agree how we want to interact with the superintendent, recognizing that when he gets here, he'll have his point of view, and it's a discussion, it's a dialogue, it's a collaboration, but we have to start with something. And I would like that all of us speak with a common voice when he comes, so he's not hearing it 7 different answers. I think we can do that groundwork before he gets here. From a vision standpoint, he may understand education, but we understand Elmhurst. And I think in my discussion with him, he has said he's going to take him some time to understand the values of our community. And I think that it would be useful for us to communicate to him, and maybe this is just another way of saying what Jim said, but the values that our community has, what our expectations are for our schools, the high-level goals. We're not telling him how to do it. We're telling him what we want the outcomes to look like. And then he can take that and form his plan on how he's going to execute against that. So I think it is helpful for us to get together beforehand to get our ducks in a row.
Mrs. Ebner.
Yeah, I agree with Chris. There's so much work to be done. We can start talking about who we are and what we care about and try to get on the same page with those two questions. And when the new superintendent comes, he can say, wow, this board is on their way to being a highly functioning board. And he can tell that we've done legwork and we're put together with some high-level questions that we've answered. We're not setting his goals. It's much more high level than that.
Mr. Collins.
Based upon what I've heard, here'd be my meeting-by-meeting suggestions. First meeting, we talk about what everybody heard on the campaign trail, what Elmhurst, while it's all fresh in everybody's minds, what Elmhurst thinks about education and what the citizens of this town, where they want us to go. And then have a series of meetings, and I don't know if it's 3 or 4, talking about the operations of our school district. Frankly, that's quite a bit to get done between now and July 1st. I think we just start with that, we're well on our way. We can conclude, when our new superintendent shows up, with a meeting talking about what our priorities are, with him to give him something to think about while he does his own due diligence in his first 90 or 100 days. And from there, we can come up with a plan of where we need to go from there. And pepper in Susan, I like the Myers-Briggs idea. Throw in a Myers-Briggs along the way so we get to know one another's decision-making style a little bit better. I think we're all better off for it. And will that pool be, there'll be monetary awards attached to that?
We're first going to have to find the budget item to actually have the Myers-Briggs scored. I think it's $35 a person, I'm teasing.
So what I'm hearing is we want to poll the board for some common meeting dates for maybe 4 meetings out. The first of which would be what we heard, what Elmhurst cares about, what we care about in terms of education. After that, we will do some operations of the school district meetings. Do you want to do that as committee of the whole? Do you want to do that as smaller committees that bring back the key points? How do you want to go about those informational meetings? Mrs. Stufen.
I would like to do it as a board as a whole.
Somebody else had their hand up. Committee of the whole. Okay. Well, I will have Mrs. Walsh throw out some dates to everybody, and we'll get your availability, and we'll get these on the calendar between now and July 1st. Is that good? Mr. Bloom.
When we're talking about kind of what Elmhurst cares about, it would be helpful. I know we had a superintendent survey that had a lot of values that the community had in there that's useful, but any of the other things that have been done over the past couple years, 2, 3, 4 years, that exist out there that the board has looked at in the past that kind of reflects some of the input? I know we have a strategic plan out there. I mean, I think that we all have an obligation to do some reading before we walk in. I mean, free-forming brainstorming sessions tend to spend a lot of time and effort unless we have clearly defined outcomes that we want to get to. You don't want to spend a bunch of time without something to show for it. And then, so input and reading, and then secondly, I'd like us to have some clearly defined output goals out of this. So what do we want to come out with? A list of things that then we want to take to the community and kind of confirm. I mean, what are we trying to get out of what we're doing? I think it's a useful exercise, but I would, I don't want the meeting to end and everybody feel good about themselves and go away, but then, we didn't kind of coalesce around what we had.
What I was envisioning is either having an IASB person or one of us simply stand with an easel and here's some themes and do we agree, do we disagree? that kind of thing,
You're the pro, yeah.
to see what's rising to the top. I mean, I would imagine,
I'll
come
give you
up
a
with
parking lot and everything.
5 or 6 things that are starting to reappear in our conversations, but we can do whatever you want.
I think facilitation would be helpful if, and not spending a bunch of money doing it would be helpful too. Maybe we can kick around who wants to lead that.
Mrs. Hirsch?
I agree. I think we can probably facilitate the campaign trail ourselves. We can probably facilitate the operations of the district and having people feel free as though we can ask questions and kind of drill down on certain things. In terms of how we interact as board members and how we're going to conduct ourselves as a board, our prior board had done a self-evaluation facilitated by IASB, and really it was about self-governance. It was a very interesting session. We actually did 2 sessions that lasted, I think, 4 hours each, and it was very helpful for the board members to hear from other individual board members in terms of their concerns, their hopes, and how we want to conduct ourselves as a board in public. And I think we benefited from having that particular session in closed session, facilitated by IASB. So I would recommend that we have at least one, well, specifically that one particular, if it's Agenda B, facilitated by IASB. I think the rest of it we can probably handle ourselves.
Let me talk to the IASB about what's appropriate for a closed session. It's my understanding it's board self-evaluation, period, and I have to see what goes into that and what we can do with that. But to me, that's something we really want to do with our new leader, but we'll see what goes in there. Mrs. Hirsch.
Just one little educational piece. We've now named the policy committee. This is a little bit of our actual training as we go, and we are going to be holding our first policy committee meeting, which the policy committee, I'm the chair, and Shannon and John are the committee members. What I wanted to do, Mrs. Droney, I think I had communicated this to you and to Dr. Krizik, for our first policy committee meeting, that we would do a 20-minute, half-hour discussion, overview of the policy manual, of how we develop policy, the role of policy in board governance, and I was planning on inviting Mr. Collins. You're well-versed in policy, having sat on the policy committee with me for the last 2 years, and Mrs. Droney, I think you could recite our policy. But, of course, you're welcome to join us, but for the first policy committee meeting, we've scheduled that for June 9th, and I wanted to extend an invitation to Karen and Chris to join us for the first half hour of that meeting. You're welcome to stay for the whole thing. It would be a committee meeting. But I was hoping that we could kind of do a mini boot camp on policy in Elmhurst and the process that we've just gone through and get all of us up to speed in terms of how we approach policy in the district. So please consider that an invitation.
Next item on this board governance topic was to talk a little bit about the school reform legislation. I wonder, Mrs. Stufen, if you could tell us about your involvement with this issue, and we can see if there's anything we want to do about it as a board.
I don't have that much involvement. I know that I'm going to be sitting on the LEND organization representing this district, and what I would like to see, or this is how I'm approaching it, is anything that impacts education. I think it's important for us as a governing body to closely watch what's going on in this particular case with legislation, so that we can be informed and we can better understand and work with the district organization on what impacts that the legislation would make to us, because that's important for us to know.
Mrs. Hirsch, did you have any thoughts on this?
The Illinois Senate had passed education reform law unanimously, and I think everybody in education got excited about some of the things that were slated to happen here in Illinois. However, that was just passed by one part of our Congress, not both houses, and it's currently being discussed. So I think this might be a little premature for us to be discussing in detail, seeing as how these things happen to change. I do agree with Mrs. Stufen, however, in that there is legislation, there is a lot of movement going on in education, and I would love to leverage some of the resources that we have, whether it's Pat Gagnos, who is the executive director of the LEND organization, who is focused and is really a lobbyist representing us in Springfield, or whether it's an organization such as Advance Illinois, which our own Elizabeth Dirkscheide, a parent in the district, works for and is heavily involved with in pushing not only legislation but advances in curriculum and those types of things. And I would like to see this board take advantage of the resources that we have and have discussions at the board table about whether it's best practices in terms of curriculum, but I would like to see us include in our agendas and our planning moving forward discussions at the board table about advances that are being made and to ensure that our district is well positioned to fully leverage changes that do come down the pike.
Anybody else? Okay, let's move on to superintendent's communication. The first item is implementation of the transportation fees for fiscal 12. Dr. Krizik.
Yes, I'm going to turn this over to Ms. Masterton, who's just going to give you a summary of where we are how we got to the point we are today, what some of the issues that have arisen with regards to the identification of a transportation fee for band, orchestra, choir, and activity buses, and then present for your consideration this evening some other ways of addressing a fiscal issue that we have, with hopefully the intent of having a little bit of consensus or direction from all of you this evening, if at all possible. So if there is any change from the last recommendation that was made way back and approved by the board way back in March, that we would have the opportunity to make some changes at our May 24th board meeting. So I'm going to just turn it over to Ms. Masterton.
Thank you, Dr. Krizik. And first of all, I want to apologize to the board. Normally, we like to get things to you the week before so that you can take a look at it. And normally, we would not have, but as you know, I was on vacation last week. And so Dr. Krizik and her staff were kind enough to assimilate a lot of the information. And today was really yesterday was really the first day that we got, as soon as I got back, that we were able to put this together. But normally you will be receiving things ahead of time, which is part of the reason if we were asking you to make a decision tonight, we would not have brought this forward in this manner. But we figured since we're all going to review it together, then you'll have a larger amount of time to have a discussion about it. And next board meeting will be when we ask you to make a decision about it if there is one to make. And that. So just to go quickly over our transportation funding information. First of all, our band and athletic and activity and extracurricular buses are all non-reimbursable. That means that when we receive reimbursement from the state for regular transportation or for special ed transportation, these additional routes are not reimbursable. So we spend approximately $207,000, $208,000 on athletic buses, activity buses for the middle school and the high school. Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I just want to clarify. When you say non-reimbursable, you mean that we will not ever get any money for these activity, athletic, band, orchestra, choir buses, whereas sometimes we get reimbursed for other transportation costs. Is that?
Yes, sometimes is a
Okay.
good word for it. Right now, regular transportation, another thing that's happened this year, as you know, we normally get state reimbursement for transportation costs. At one point, and I'm going to show my age on this one because I don't even think Chris knows a time when this has actually happened, but about 20 years ago, it was almost 100% reimbursement that you got back for providing regular transportation and providing special ed transportation. They've tried to hold true to the special ed transportation as much as possible, but regular transportation has been eroded now Last year, we expected to receive about 40%. And I'll talk about allotments. I'm not actually talking about what we actually get, because that's an entirely different thing. This year, we're looking at it probably for coming up for next year, 10% of our regular transportation costs. And this is one grouping of costs that isn't considered regular. It isn't considered special ed. It's just not going to be paid for. It's a decision by the district to incur those costs. The state does not feel that this is anything that has to be done, needs to be done in any way, shape, or form, and they're not going to give us any money for it. So that's really what it comes down to. Now, that may not be best practice, but in terms of reimbursement, that's the way the state works it. So because of this loss of revenue and because of some other changes that we made, we're looking at, for this dropping down from 40% to 10%, about an additional $50,000 worth of loss of revenue in our transportation fund, which is already not in a good shape at all because of the loss of the funding. Under normal circumstances, the transportation fund is funded about 50% from the state funding and another 50% from taxes. At this point, we're really funding more, about 75% in taxes, and we are capped. So that means that we're trying to find different ways to reduce our costs or to supplement our revenue one way or the other so that we can keep the fund intact. And so because there's little that we can do in terms of moving funds around. That's just not allowed. There's some things, but not a lot of things that we can do in terms of that. And obviously, anything that you take from one spot means that something else goes not being done. So we are in a situation, which is part of the reason why we've had to do EBRD as well, where the economy is in problems, and in this case, transportation was one area that we looked at, even though it was not recommended in EBRD, it was talked about a little bit as something we might look at. And so the board made a decision to go with a fee. Right now, what we have is our activity and band buses. In band, chorus, and orchestra, our morning buses, Brian has in morning. Brian has 3 buses, Churchville has 3 buses, and Sandburg has 2 buses. After school, Brian has 1 route, and that's for athletics normally and clubs. Churchville has 3, and that includes their additional help that they do through their title program after school, and Sandburg has 2. So we have 14 routes, and they are at a cost of almost $10,000, plus the fuel surcharge that we have on our contract, which is the surcharge on diesel fuel of anything over $2.50 a gallon. So obviously right now, things are going to hurt a little bit in terms of that. We've gone through it before. It'll calm down again. But, so it really does, the economy is affecting us right now. So our middle school costs right now are $138,644.10. And at the high school, we don't have morning buses, but we do have, because they start early enough probably, but we do have afternoon buses and evening buses. At this point, we have 4 at 4:30 in the afternoon and 3 at 6:15 in the evening. And that totals 7 for a cost of $69,322.05. Altogether, 21 routes at a little over $208,000 plus the surcharge. And the surcharge is all thrown into the whole cost of transportation program, which is why we didn't break it out in this. Our ridership. At the middle schools, we have eligible students and then actual probably numbers, and we've gotten a lot of different numbers about what our actual ridership is. First from the schools, then from first student, then different numbers from the schools, different numbers from first student, so it's a little hard to peg down. Obviously, in bad weather, we get a lot more ridership than we do in good weather, basically, is really what it comes down to. But at Bryan, for band and orchestra, we have 100 students that are eligible. The estimate we made was 80 to 90. First student says about 83. And we use 3 buses for that, which actually has a capacity of 216 students. Our activity bus at Bryan, our estimate was 30. And first student is, but could be as few as 4 or 5. First student is saying there's usually an average of 12 on there, and that is on a 72 capacity bus. Okay. Churchville, have 135 students that are eligible to ride the bus for band and orchestra and chorus. We have 67. First student is telling us that about 67 ride on there. And again, we're using 3 buses that have a capacity of 216 students. Part of the reason is obviously because the routes are going in different directions. And it's a morning route, and, you know, moving kids here and there, you're trying to be as economical as you can in terms of time for our students and the amount of time that they ride. In the afternoon, because of the programs that we have, there are supplemental programs, we have approximately 65 students riding, again with 3 buses. And at Sandburg, they have 128 students eligible. The ridership is about 65. We had an estimate originally of about 90 to 100. And in the afternoon on their 2 buses, about 15 students per route, and they're saying that there's probably about 20 students on average per route. And that's using 2 buses, both in the morning and in the afternoon. At York, our estimate was 54 to 108 students are riding the buses. First student is saying anywhere from 60 to 80 on any given day. So we're using 7 buses for anywhere from 60 to 80 kids in the afternoon. Yes?
Pat, can you break out for us the difference in ridership between the 4:30 and the 6:15? I have an impression that those are different.
Very different. And in fact, the 6:15 we've been told is probably about 5 to 10 students per bus at the most on that. So here's what our current plan is that was approved on the March 22nd, I believe, board meeting. We assessed a $330 annual fee, which was actually $165 per semester for middle school band, orchestra, and chorus activity buses and high school activity buses. The assumption was that probably less than half of the students would utilize the bus service with this new fee structure, and so we figured we could offset expenses by approximately $750. Obviously, we've had a lot of time to think about different ways that we could do things, and certainly a lot of feedback about different ways that we might be able to do things. So we considered some additional options, and these are the things that we're going to ask you to decide upon or at least give us some guidance tonight, and then decide upon at our next board meeting. The first would be to implement an athletics season or semester fee payment option. We'd already thought about the semester fee, but the athletic session would really break it down into trimesters of $110 per trimester or $165 per semester. We could also, and we worked with the high school, that we could come up with a system of buying a one-off ticket at $2 at the bookstore that the student would be able to turn into the bus driver, throw in a basket, and be able to board the bus in the afternoon or in the evening on a one-off, and certainly also in packets of 10 or 20 as well. The impact would be, the pros of that would assist with non-claimable transportation cost recovery, because we could get the $57,750, but it might be, as we know, and what we've heard is it would be very difficult for families to afford, in particular families with more than one student that's active in activities. So our second option would be to reduce our middle school activity routes by 2, one at Churchville and one at Sandburg, and reduce our high school activity routes by 2. 3 at 4:30 would be what we would do, so reduce 1 at 4:30 and 1 at 6:15. We would then implement a $75 per year transportation fee based on 412 students annually. We figured that 75 would be a lot more palatable, and therefore the ridership would be up. And we could do as little as $25 per season or $37.50 per semester, and a $1 use per single use. And I know that seems a little bit more than would be. It'd probably be closer to 50, 60, 75 cents, but to expedite, we'd have to print tickets. We've got the labor that goes along with it to just round up to $1. per cost. The savings for that would be approximately $39,000 in activity routes cost, and another $30,900 that we would be getting in revenue. So our total offset would be about $70,512.60, which is kind of a nice option there. The impact would further assist with the additional non-claimable transportation cost recovery. It significantly reduces the original established fee, and it maintains bus service availability. It does increase the length of the school ride in the afternoon and in the morning for some. Oh, I'm sorry, just in the afternoon. Our third idea is very similar. Reduce middle school activity routes by 2, 1 less each at Churchville and Sandburg, 1 less each at 4:30 and 6:15 at the high school, and implement a $90 per year transportation fee based on the 412 students, $30 per season, $40 per semester, and again, $1 per single use. That gets us a little more money. It gets to approximately $6,000 more, $6,200 more on that. And again, the same pros and cons would apply on that. And finally, our fourth option, see, we did give you a lot of options there, would be to implement an athletic season and or semester fee payment option at the same amount that we had talked about before, the $330. It would be $110 per season, $165 per semester, $2 per use for single use, and reduce the 4 routes. That would give us a total offset of $97,612.60. Obviously, that further assists with the non-claimable transportation cost recovery, but it's really not reducing the original established fee. It does maintain bus service availability and increases the length of the end of the school day activity bus ride, and as we talked about before, it might be difficult for many families to afford. So we've given you 4 options there. We've been working very well with the high school to talk about different ways to take care of a detention or take care of, a last-minute change of plans, of not being able to get there to pick you up or anything like that, and that would be the one-off ticket. They'll be able to do that, and also we figured what we would end up being able to do is in the high school in particular, they already get as part of their ID, there's a bus route number on there. So what they would do is apply stickers that would signify that they were either on a season or a semester type of a situation. So that can be fairly easily implemented, both of those options. So that does kind of take care of that individual problems that go on and gives some people some other options in terms of that. The fee itself, though, we do feel that there does need to be some fee, particularly because this is not a required transportation model, and because we don't get any reimbursement. So we'll leave it up to you to have a discussion about that.
Any questions for Ms. Masterton? Mrs. Ebner?
This is for Dr. Krizik. I know you've been talking to the high school. What do parents or stakeholders think about increasing the length of the bus ride? Is that something that they don't mind doing? They'd rather do that than increase the fee?
I only met with a small group of parents that were from the high school, so I wouldn't say I had met with the high school. The strong overarching issue that was communicated to me was that the $330 per year was perceived to be very difficult for many of our families to afford, and that could the district find alternative ways of trying to address some fiscal matters. It was not a solution generating meeting. It was just really just listening to some of the issues and concerns. I think they raised the issue of, what does our ridership look like, and are we optimizing our buses? And that forced Ms. Masterton and I to look at, okay, so how many students are actually riding? What's the potential for riding? And, is there a way to reduce our expenditures in other ways other than just adding costs? I think it was considered more optimal to have bus service available than completely eliminate a bus service completely. Ms. Masterton and I did not put an option up for you to completely eliminate the 6:15 buses, even though ridership is relatively small. It ranges at any given time during the year, and weather plays a role. Jeff Hartman had taken 2 weeks' worth of data, and it was really the question that was asked, just a few minutes ago. The ridership between the 4:30 and the 6:15 bus is hugely different, and it could be on any given day. It might be 100 students on 4 buses, but it also could drop down to 40 to 50 students at 4:30. But what was apparent is the 6:15 bus on one day, there were 8 students that were riding 3 different buses. There was 1 on one bus, 2 on another, 5 on another. So I think there is a way of looking. That's why we brought up that particular piece. We did not want to extend the morning bus routes for the middle school students who are already starting their day really early and trying to reduce buses at the beginning of the day to make that ridership long. We want kids to get the best start to their day as possible. And, the end of the day ridership is not as much of an issue, and it may not extend the bus routes that significantly longer, considering that the ridership is so less. It would just be for the bus company to do the routing.
One of the big benefits of being able of charging a fee is us being aware of who it is that's generally riding the bus and being able to eliminate some areas that we might be driving into that we don't need to drive into because there's really no one that's going to be let off in that area. We don't have that option now because of the fact that anybody can board, a different, they have certain buses that they board that's going to the east side, going to the north side, going to the south side or whatever, but they really don't, they're not really aware, and they'll have general stops at every different area, whether there's somebody there or whether not, because they don't know. If we have listings of where people live, we are then able to route the bus. We save gas that way, we save time that way. So that's one of the options that would help us.
Mrs. Ebner, just in response, ideally, I think, people would look for a way, is there a way not to have a fee at all? I think we're trying to, as Ms. Masterton laid out, try to recapture some cost recovery of a non-reimbursable expense. And while every district might do things a little bit different, even our comparable districts, some may have not eliminated, some may have eliminated transportation completely, some may have not charged any costs. I think we have to look at our dynamics and what we have available to work with us. So what I do want to say is there's just been a genuine interest by, several parents, at the high school level for us to take a second look at this. And I think that was the impetus of those conversations is could we take a second look at this? And were there other ways of trying to achieve maybe a more win-win opportunity for parents, whatever that definition of win-win might look like. But they felt the $330 per year was unduly burdensome. Mr. Collins.
I think this is a very good first step here, so thank you for doing this. What's the feasibility? In fact, I encourage some more input than just the 7 people at this board table. Can we make an online survey out of this? I mean, we've done one online survey, but I would be very curious to ask parents, do they have a preference? Or maybe formatted, and I'm sure we have experts in the district that are much better at constructing surveys than I, but asking parents to vote for each one that they would participate in, and also get some estimation of the people that would be inclined to buy the single-use tickets. And I think that would be far more informative, particularly if we could put an estimate on here of if we reduced bus routes, what that would increase the ride by. But it actually sounds like we may be able to decrease the amount of time that the route takes because we know where everybody lives.
I think there will be some increase in terms of if you've got 3 buses that are going out to the east, out to the west, and out to the south, for instance, and maybe now you're going to have, southeast and southwest. Obviously, you're going to have some probably increase, but I think it will be not as much as, a full, doubling or 1.5 times as much because hopefully, in particular in the morning routes, but even in the afternoon routes, being able to know who's going to be riding and how fast it will take.
Well, then,
to
if
do
we
it.
could come up with some estimate of what the maximum ride time would be on a bus, include this on here. I mean, I'd love to see this put in a survey format and get as much input as we possibly can. Because the more input we get, the more the ridership is going to be, and the higher your fee income will be.
Mr. Bloom?
Well, I'd like to echo Jim's thoughts. I mean, I think we need to survey the customers and find out, what they want, what the users want. But I think we, as a board, need to set some parameters around what the choices are that we offer them. And my question is, what is the whole, so we've got a budget that exists today based on a $330 fee. And if you pull that fee out, the hole it creates is $58,000, right? So some of these options actually allow us to raise more money for our budget. And, my question is, I understand the budget issues, but this is an important aspect of activities. I want to make sure that the buses are used, obviously, so you put something in there that makes sure that we're not wasting things. But by the same token, anything that discourages participation in activity, I'm a little bit worried about. And so, my question would be, if you eliminate these bus routes, riding a little bit longer bus may be an acceptable solution, and just the ones proposed say 40,000 out of the 57, so it leaves 17 left to have, and which would equate to a much lower fee, actually, if you were just trying to plug that hole and not raise any additional money, which would be budget neutral.
Those costs are based on predicting that there'd be about 412 students that would actually pay that fee. We don't believe, so we had to put a number out there. So, Mr. Bloom, we think that in reality, less than 2/3 or a half would actually pay that fee. So that would be the optimal revenue that you would expect to receive, not the actual revenue that you would expect to receive. And so if you extrapolated Ms. Masterton's $330 fee, and she had used 315, that was about $30,000 or $127,000. She actually cut that in half. So we're just giving you what the outside potential revenue could be if.
What's the gap, though? I mean, what's the hole? That's all I'm saying is if you pull that 330 out, what do you do to your budget? What is budget neutral?
At this point, we're actually an additional $50,000 in the hole, not just the $57,000 that we had talked about originally that we it included as part of our budget reductions to help with the transportation, but another $50,000 because of the loss of state revenue, and that could be even worse. So, and ordinarily I would say, okay, but $50,000 is the cost of 50 computers. $50,000 is the cost of a number of different things, including
I
a
understand,
personnel.
but as we sit here now, if we make no changes to anything we do, you're saying that
$100,000.
it's $100,000, but 50 of that was unforeseen. So whether it comes from the transportation program or other places in the budget, it's going to cost our budget $50,000 because we have a shortfall in reimbursement that was not foreseen at the time we did the budget.
Well, ordinarily we would try to generate some revenue to cover any kind of loss like that. That's really, I mean, we sort of have to. If we had a fund balance to
Right,
deal
no,
with in
I'm-
terms of transportation, we would say, okay, maybe we can absorb that. We have no fund balance in transportation to absorb that. That's the concern.
But so there's two issues here, though. There's the original $330 we were going to charge to generate $50,000 or $58,000 worth of income, and then there's a separate issue, which is a change to our assumptions as far as reimbursement goes, which has now required us to close another $50,000 worth of the gap. Okay, so I think that explanation is helpful. As it pertains, I mean, because if you're presenting this showing that we have to offset $58,000 and we're going to charge fees that raise $90,000 or $75,000, people looking at this are going to say, "Hey, you went and grabbed another $15,000, $25,000." So I think that's helpful. But getting back to Jim's point, I think that revenue neutral is a good goal to have. I don't know. We as a board probably should decide what the parameters are, and then we should ask you guys to craft some solutions, and then to pull the customers and ask them what works best for them, recognizing that we do have constraints. We have to pay our bills. We have to maintain a balanced budget. When we do that, one other question I have is that, is there the potential to use smaller buses? I mean, it looks like the utilization rate is really small.
The buses that are used are buses that have been used for taking the kids at elementary, at middle school, and at high school home. And so they can't go back to the bus barn. First of all, they don't have smaller
so
buses.
They make a loop and then they come back
Yeah,
around.
that's
Okay.
how they do it.
All right.
So that's why they use the larger buses, and they just don't have the ability to, and actually don't have the fleet for 21 small buses to deal with that. And plus the fact that, I mean, I had thought about that, and we kind of say, do you really need that big of a bus? But yeah, they really do need that big of a bus, and the way that things work out, it would be more costly for them to go all the way to the barn and buy buses and do everything
Sure,
else.
no,
So,
that
yeah.
answers the question.
You know, one of the other things that, I appreciate what you're talking about in terms of an activity fee and everything that goes with it and wanting to encourage activities. Part of what we have found and reported back to us over the years is that sometimes kids get on the bus that really aren't being part of activities and extracurriculars. They've, headed out somewhere to a friend's house for an hour or two, and now they're coming back and hopping on the bus to take a ride home. Or they hung out in the schoolyard and played a quick game of ball, and now there's a 4:15 bus, so now I can hustle home. And, while that's great activities and social activities and good things for kids, it's really not something that we need to have to pay for. Having someone pay something at least allows us to be able to control that ridership and be aware of what we're doing. We've even had problems with people that aren't even our students getting on buses, boyfriends from different places, because there's nothing to prevent them from doing that. So that's part of the reason why we believe that if we want to be proactive in dealing with costs, even if it's the smallest amount of $75, it's better than nothing at all.
Sure, I understand. You're trying to find that point where elasticity, moves it, whether you're not going to use it. And I think a survey helps us figure that out. When we ask the parents, hey, at what point in time is your kid not going to be in an activity? Would your usage go up, down, and different? Because I'm real sensitive to trying to keep kids in activities.
Mrs. Hirsch, you had your hand up earlier.
I'm interested in hearing more about feedback from the high school and the middle school. I feel as though we heard some initial concerns expressed, or I received a number of concerns expressed at the York PTSA meeting a couple of weeks ago, and I brought back to you the concerns that had been raised, and then there have been further discussions that have taken place. But I don't know that we have heard from the high school and the middle school staff who run, for instance, band, chorus, orchestra programs, and the after-school activities in terms of what the impact is going to be. My personal preference is to remain cost neutral. And I concur with Mr. Bloom, and I want to be very careful about affecting ridership. If I look at the ridership at Churchville, for instance, and it's helpful to understand that the activity buses after school that support Churchville are supporting some of our Title I programming, which is a key component that we want to continue to offer that ridership. But if it's helpful to have the 6:15 buses out of York. I have heard the anecdotal stories. I have kids myself. That 6:15 time does not always work. It's not when practice ends. I think the other unanticipated consequence is once we do start charging fees, if that is in fact the way that we want to go, you're going to see behavior change. And I don't know that we have anticipated what kind of different behaviors are going to be exhibited. I heard an anecdotal story of a high school athletic coach saying, you're going to have to pay $330 to take the bus home, so parents get together and figure out a carpool. And I think we should be very thoughtful about what behaviors we want to encourage, as well as attempting to anticipate the unintended consequences of making these kind of cuts. honestly, I can tell you what I recommend from my purview, which is as a parent of 2 kids at York, as a parent of a kid who participated in the orchestra program, but as much as I'm an elected member of the board and I'm supposed to represent the community, I think there's a vast majority of parents and staff members, both at the middle school and the high school level, that have not been heard from. And I think that is an important constituency that we need to get some feedback from on these particular options that have been put in front of us. So, in that vein, Dr. Krizik, I think, I'm going to the PTSA meeting again tomorrow. I was hoping to report back to the PTSA and give them an update on, where the board is, where the district is in terms of this particular concern that had been expressed. Where are we in terms of plans of soliciting input from the high school? The board received this update, this document, at 4:30 today. So we had very little time to react to it. We're all trying to react from the seat of our pants. And I understand everybody gets their vacation time, but I'm assuming this information has not been put out to the high school and to the middle school to react to. And that is something that I would very much like to have their input on these various options. And whether it's through a formal survey, it's challenging at times to structure a survey so that you're getting, valid feedback. And that we're going to get the response rate that we want. I'm not saying that we shouldn't do it, but I think that we have constituencies that are already in place that we should seek input from so that we can make a better informed decision in terms of cost sensitivity as well as the anticipated and unanticipated consequences of implementing these types of changes. So I appreciate the information. I think it's helpful to have choices. I think one other concern that I have is in terms of fees, if there was one area, we could just say, let's cut 5 bus routes and we've recovered the funds. So we no longer offer 615 and we cut back on the middle school activity buses and charge no fee, which means that, we don't have the overhead of trying to administer, fees in terms of collecting fees for the buses. The idea of us routing buses in a more efficient manner, I'm concerned about that because then you have the kid that went into the bookstore because they were sick and they stayed late for a test and the bus route is no longer efficient because this student lives here and I need to go to this stop. So there's no guarantee that knowing ahead of time who's going to be on the bus, if we want to offer flexibility, I'm not sure how much efficiency we're going to get out of that. So I think we have more work to do in terms of soliciting feedback, and I look forward to getting more feedback.
Mrs. Stufen.
You don't necessarily have to answer this right now or tonight, but I guess what I'm thinking about is there's potential huge impact. So what are we thinking about a process to understand what the impact is, depending on what option is implemented? To look at no or low ridership and what bus routes make sense to reduce in next year's. You know what I mean? So I'm looking at, is there some way is there a process or some way to look at what happens if we implement these options, and can we change course? I mean, if there are buses that have no students, it doesn't make sense to have that bus there. But we probably don't have the option to say that bus route is gone. Okay, so can you talk about that a little bit then?
We do have the option. We're not tied to the number of routes, and we actually did a study last year on our regular routes just to see whether we could make reductions on routes. So there's nothing in our contract that says how many routes we have to have and that we have to continue to have those routes. So if we had no ridership, and the schools notified us, for a couple of weeks now and, or a month, we have had no ridership on that bus, then we could say, okay, we're going to trial out and not have that bus run and see how we do with it. And, whether or not there's an issue in terms of other ridership or whether it increases. So we do have the option of being able to do that. And that's certainly a course of action that we would follow in terms of dealing with it. We can route the buses, and normally what happens is that the one-offs that come in, they basically have to do as they do with public transportation. They have to stop at the closest stop although our bus drivers are very good about trying to make sure that kids get to a location that's close enough to home in one way or another. So they're willing to do that. And, altogether, I would say that, yes, we will lose some parents to carpooling. We will lose some parents to, or some kids to finding alternate routes. We may have an increase from the high school from kids saying, I want to drive, but we have that anyway. So, those are the kinds of things that happen when you do try to reduce extracurricular transportation. And it isn't necessarily a bad thing. Having parents do carpooling is a lot of what many school districts that cannot afford extracurricular transportation do. And, frankly, we cannot afford to continue in the same model that we have done in the past. That's just the reality right now. That doesn't mean that this has to be for forever. That doesn't mean that after 1 year we may find that we suddenly are getting more transportation money again, or we're able to levy more, we'll be able to do more, our transportation fund's in a better place, we can start building up a little reserves and deal with this, and we can't lower that or altogether get rid of it. It doesn't prevent us from doing any of that.
Well, I guess that's why I was asking the question about what's the process. What will we do as a district to watch that and kind of cut it off before it becomes an issue? I guess that's what I would want some information on. Are you saying that you're always studying it every year? We're looking at ridership and, okay. So then let me clarify. Did I understand it right? If there are 0 students, we can cancel the bus? Or is it a low number, and what's that number?
If we have a consistently, a bus that's running at 4 or 5 students, and we have more than one bus in a situation that is such that they can ride on the other bus, then we would definitely be cutting it down. I think you have to look at it from a case-by-case basis and rely on the school's input as well to say, you know what, we got 5 kids that are riding this bus and they do it intermittently. We think you could go on the one bus and be done with it, and that'll be the way it goes. It will increase ridership or length of the ride by 10 minutes, but that's not horrible considering everything. So we think that you can go with that. It's not a unilateral decision that we just do. We need the input of who's riding, and I can't get that without the schools letting us know that. So that's what we would be doing, is canvassing the schools and saying who's riding. The other thing is it's cyclical. It's very cyclical in nature. So I could say I don't need any because, we're not in a season where we have a large sport that needs a 6:15 bus. So I might be able to get rid of a 6:15 bus for 2 or 3 months and then bring it back in the spring for, let's say, track or whatever. So those are the kinds of things that we have to be more diligent about doing and more cognizant of doing, and that takes time and staff to do. But it is something that we would be doing.
Dr. Krizik, you've heard several board members talk about a survey. Is that feasible? Where do we want to go with this?
Well, I'm just trying to backward map this whole process, and that is that some of you know that we, in posting for school registration, we posted at least for the high school group, the $165 per semester piece. This is a decision that I think you ultimately want to make, I'll say no later than June, so that you can adequately communicate it, unless you want to go into July. So, certainly putting together a survey is certainly feasible around some of the parameters. I think, Chris, your point's well taken. We need to decide what those parameters are going to be around which we're going to get feedback on, so that it would be acceptable to the board to have some solutions around those things. And certainly, we certainly can put a survey together. We will not be prepared, I don't believe, to put a survey out rather quickly and be prepared to potentially bring this back on May 24th, 2 weeks from now, in order to get an adequate time period to put the survey together, craft it, review it, put it out there, tabulate it, analyze it, give people adequate time to even make them aware that a survey is out there to fill out. And so, at the earliest, we might be able to come back with those survey results at the June 15th board meeting, with all of you looking at those results, potentially crafting a recommendation for you to act on in July. But at some point, we have to clearly communicate to our public what those fees are or are not. Technically, right now, because there's no action tonight on this, technically right now, you have a $330 annual fee. That's what you have now. I think the attempt tonight was to bring some preliminary solutions, some options, to help mitigate that, because the feedback we're receiving is that it is unduly burdensome, and it could, to Mr. Bloom's point, have a more significant adverse impact on participation than not. Some informal feedback we've received in various emails today were parents looking for a much more reasonable fee that the district would consider. Now, that is a few emails, 2 or 3 that came today, and it was interesting, because when I read those emails, they had no idea what Ms. Masterton and I had worked on. It was actually a little slightly higher than what we were proposing. They felt $100 to $150 per year was more reasonable than $330. So we didn't go that high. We didn't go that high. We tried to come up with some alternative solutions. So the answer is, can we put a survey together? Yes, we can always put a survey together. Certainly, I think we'd want a mechanism, Lee, if we possibly can. We can't put a mechanism in. I don't think it would be costly to not allow the same person to do the same survey over and over and over again, correct? Could the same person do the survey over and over and over again?
Can't you collect an email address? Yeah, we could collect. We'd have to come up with a new email address.
Yeah, we would have to collect data from the user. We wouldn't be able to, I don't think, track it by IP address or anything, because people could move around. So we'd have to get some data from.
You can make it hard. I mean, you
Yeah.
can't make it foolproof.
Right, yeah, you could ask for.
One use, one survey.
I wouldn't want to turn it into an American Idol voting contest.
No, obviously, but there's something between here and there. I mean, how long did that bookstore survey take? I mean, I get the notice that we were doing the survey on the electronic bookstore a week ago.
I think you
week and a half
have to
ago?
do the backward mapping. Malia, how many days did you spend on even putting the survey
I
together?
mean, you got to put the questions together. I mean, I understand the process, but that seemed to come out pretty quick.
It did, but I would say if we're going to survey on a regular basis like this, I mean,
Look,
that was a high-pressure
worst
thing.
case,
We knew that timing was important, so we really hustled to do that.
This is the same boat, right? I mean,
Same thing.
Even if it was, here's 3 options, vote for your favorite. I mean,
I-
I'd like more input than that, but if that's
Right.
the best you can get.
I think the danger of continually surveying our citizens over and over again is that at some point, they're going to stop taking our surveys. So I would just like to have a more concerted approach to, let's think about what kinds of things we need to know. Do we need, I know we can do dipsticking, but we want to be sure that we know what we're asking, we know what we're going to do with the information, and we know what we need to know. So I'm just a little cautious of just throwing surveys out there and then saying, oh, you know what, we didn't capture this and we needed this. So the rush, that's what makes me nervous is.
Yeah, it's a significant
It sounds
fee,
like
and it's a significant amount of people that it's touching. And so I think
agree.
that starts to meet the criteria. Now, I mean, you can do the survey, or to Maria's point, at a minimum, I think you should talk to some representative group from each school that's impacted to get the feedback from them. We tend to pay attention to the loudest folks, but I think we need to make sure that we pay attention to all the folks.
Dr. Krizik, is it possible for us to implement one of these options and then do a more thoughtful gathering of information, either at the beginning of the school year when people see how it's actually working? What is it most important to actually get some relief from the $330 fee, as we have heard?
I think it's twofold. I think it's to get some relief, and I think it's to have a thoughtful way of approaching it. I think we're going to have to analyze the impact of any implementation after a year. And you may find that you can reduce your transportation expenses even further, and it won't have an adverse impact on participation. At this point in time, it would only be projection on the part of any coach, any sponsor to say, I think it's going to affect 25 or 30%. We'd like to be a little bit more data-driven and look at what the actual numbers are going to be. And so we don't have that. We have no data. So having those conversations and getting feedback is a good thing. But just know that would not be based on any data. It would be based on just hypothesis. That's all that would be, to see what the impact would be. I think it would have to be monitored. So I think twofold. One is, I agree with Ms. Smith, and that I think we have to be prudent in the purpose and use of what we choose to survey, so that we have a clear identification about the intent of why we're using surveys, so that we do not, when the survey is really critical and important to all of you, we do not have people, I'll say, burned out on surveys. We've just received 5 or 6 in the last 2 months. This is too much. I don't have time for this. And so we wouldn't want to lose important feedback in such a way. I think administratively we'll go back and, based on the information we've kind of put together for you tonight, some options, craft a rather simple survey. We can certainly solicit some additional feedback from the middle school and high school staff on what their feelings are about these various options. I think they should weigh in on what they think about the reasonableness or the non-reasonableness of these options are. And I think it would be our intent, because I would like to be thoughtful about this, to bring this back to you on June 15th. That gives us time to put a very thoughtful survey, quick but thoughtful, and look at the data, get some additional data, and if it's appropriate, maybe create an opportunity for a focus group to talk around the data before we come back to you. So I would really like to give ourselves the most options as possible, and I do not want to rush this until May 24th. There is no sense of urgency here. I think if we can just report out, and the media helps us report out, that this fee is under close review, and that within the next 2 months, the board will be coming up with a decision on what this looks like, I think that's really what the community wants to know, that you are taking seriously some feedback that you're getting and looking to find alternatives. That's the first important message that needs to get out. The next important message is we need to also communicate the importance of the survey. We want to make sure that, we get as many responses as possible so that it has some validity.
One more comment, Mrs. Hirsch.
I have one area of concern that I want to express, and that is, in particular, some of the emails that came to the board today specifically referred to the fees related to the band, chorus, orchestra, morning bus routes. And if I had to prioritize myself the contribution that these extracurricular bus routes provide, band, chorus, and orchestra, first of all, at the middle school level, are 0-hour courses which are graded, attendance is taken, students perform in extracurricular performances, and it is a 0-hour course for our middle school students. Those students also pay a fee for band and orchestra. It's $150 a year to participate in the program, and for chorus, I think it's $65. To add a $330 fee, which is where we are tonight, on top of, okay, when I balance the value of transportation at $330 versus not only the orchestral or the band instruction, the benefit that the students get from performing in an ensemble, the sectionals, they're pulled out during the day, the instruction they're receiving, I'm sorry, we're off kilter. I would like to see a hybrid solution offered up, and that is that band, chorus, orchestra students, those students that morning bus route that is supporting the middle schools, are not charged a fee. Those parents are already paying a fee. I'm very concerned about our performing arts program at the middle school level. First of all, we're asking those students to be at the middle school at 7:20. I can't remember exactly what time they start. We're asking them to pay a fee for the benefit. We're expecting attendance. We're expecting their involvement. It is a course, and I'm very concerned about the activity level. In addition, they have instrument rentals. I'm very concerned about what's going to happen to our instrumental music program and our choral program if we are asking those families to pay $500 a year for those students to participate in that program. I think that's an unreasonable amount. I would like to see a hybrid solution where we say that as a class, it is graded, it is at the middle school, those bus routes are exempt from the fee. And if we need to cancel or alter some activity fees that are optional, again, not saying that they're less important, but I think those are in a different category. So I would like to see a hybrid solution, see if we could come up with a nominal fee for the activity buses and see if there's any way that we could actually provide that level of service, district funded, for those middle school offerings.
Ms. Masterton?
That, I understand your thought process on that, just to understand that's our largest ridership. So, you're talking of possibly about 100 to 110 kids who would be riding at intermittent times in the evenings. Intermittent because of seasons, because the one-offs, because of once a week for a club or whatever. So that would significantly reduce the amount of revenue that you'd be bringing in and that's just my caveat on all of that, is just be aware of that. I don't disagree with you that it is a burden. I understand where you're coming from, but just so that you understand that that is the largest ridership on that.
Mr. McDonough, you wanted to weigh in earlier, and we're going to move on.
I really am favorable towards the combination hybrid of cost reduction as well as cost shifting. I'd like to see separated the York. Well, the example is the York activity bus and the 430 and the 615 bus. This 430 bus, I think, at York has a lot of non-extracurricular riders. And the important thing is to make sure they ride, and they ride for free because it's part of our core educational mission. 615 is virtually no academic or disciplinary riders. The other thing that I wanted to wonder is, a survey is not a good way to collect new ideas, but focus groups really are, and so I'd lean that way. What I'm wondering if something could be touched on during that is options to first student. We have built in all these solutions $10,000 per bus for a year, and we're just reducing it in $10,000 chunks. Is there some other way of doing some solution that involves community? Okay.
Our bus service is a bid bus service, and we have a contract, and the contract is by route. So that's really the only way that if you're asking, can we find a different way of charging or dealing with that? Okay, I misunderstood then. I'm not really sure what you were asking.
I was asking if there's an alternative to a bus from first student to meet this transportation need. Is there some other thing? I mean, one parent, I don't think it was a good solution, said you've got those activity buses sitting there. I know those are used for activities, but I'm just looking for a solution that involves, there's a lot of people out there with a lot of ideas, and just wondering if we could entertain some of those ideas.
Next item on the agenda, Follett High School book rental presentation.
I'm going to turn this portion of the meeting over to Jeff Hartman and Rob Wagner, who are going to give you some of the early stages of thinking of the concept of an online textbook rental program. You received last night at 7:06 p.m. If you was going into your email box within 30 seconds after I sent it, the copy of the PowerPoint and some draft background information this evening. In addition to both Mr. Wagner and Mr. Hartman, I believe they brought along a representative from Follett Book Services just as a resource to provide you with information, as this is not a concept that has been brought before the board before. So I will turn it now over to Mr. Hartman.
That is correct. We are presenting an idea tonight, something new, but we're also going to look back at some history here to kind of give you some background as to how we made this decision and where we've come to get to the point where the bookstore needs to be looked at. So to fill you in on some background so you understand the need to look at the bookstore, because I'm not sure everybody, especially with new board members and kids with different age level kids, and we have to have a reason we're looking at the bookstore, and so everybody needs to understand that. If you're not familiar with our bookstore and our bookstore process, you have to understand that every summer we have a registration process that takes place, and parents line up and they've been doing this for years, to pick up their kids' books, and parents and students. And it's a rather long process, long lines. It's usually in the heat of the summer in August. Parents come back for this long, extenuated process of lining up for books. And last summer probably, well, it didn't go as well as we'd liked it to, especially on the first day, because it's a first come, first serve process. We have a limited number of used books. And since the economy has gotten worse, those used books have become more highly desired because people have less money and they really want the used books. So naturally, everybody came at one time last year, and it kind of was a rush to be the first in line. And naturally, we had a lot of people coming that first night for those books, and it was not the best. So we had a lot of people coming at once, etc. What we have in place is a archaic system. It's a process where people are vying for a limited number of used books. They're coming to get those books, and it's very outdated. We have those limited number of books. The books, as you know, are getting more and more expensive, and so everybody's vying for the few that we have. And so what we've decided is we need to look at this bookstore. It's got its limitations. It's kind of archaic. It's an outdated system. And so a committee was formed. Mrs. Betterich, the bookstore manager, Brian Dunk, Carol Esposito, David Smith from the tech department, Rob Wagner, and I decided this year we're going to look at this and try to make this better. It's not working the way it should. It's been in place for a long time, and we can make it better. So the first thing we started looking at was how can we improve the current bookstore system. And the first thing we thought is, well, naturally, since everybody's lining up for the used number of books, we didn't really have a way of increasing the number of used books or lowering the price. We thought about offering more online book purchases by going to Amazon.com, but we'd offered that to some of our parents and they didn't seem to go for that. But we looked at a scheduling package, much like our parent conference. Well, that's a great idea. It'll improve the process of everybody coming at one time, and maybe we won't have such long lines, and it'll ease that burden. But it's still kind of scratching the surface of what really needs to be done. It doesn't get to the heart of things. You know, we like to make things here. We like to really make a leap forward. It's just we still have the current bookstore system that we currently have. We're not really moving forward progressing that far. We still don't address the high price of textbooks. We don't address the limited number of used textbooks, and we still have a very labor-intensive system that's pretty costly to run. Well, as we were going through this process this winter and looking at that system of purchasing, all of a sudden we noticed that Hinsdale, District 86, had adopted a Follett online system for the method of textbooks. This is what colleges tend to use. You know, it's an online system of buying books, and some high schools have been adopting this. And I immediately called the assistant principal over at Hinsdale to see what they had done, because this seemed like, well, this is exactly what we want to do. And David Smith and I contacted Follett, and we had them in to show us what we needed to do. Now, we know we were on a short timeline. There were many questions to answer, but we began to explore this. At that time, we brought in some more people to analyze this. We brought in the people from the business office, Helen Perez, Malia Smith, and they were involved in this also with Adrian Garland to analyze and look at what they had to offer. Well, we could see some advantages to this was that this system would allow us to use Mrs. Betterich, our current bookstore manager, to oversee the books that Follett currently has. She would take over and be their point of contact. The online purchase of books would be eliminated, would eliminate the school, the waiting in lines. Families would be able to use computer, or they could do it by phone to order their books, and the books would be delivered to their home rather than waiting in line like they had in the past. It provides an economical option which would expand the number of used or books so that we would no longer have to look at the limited number of used books. Now we'd have a wide option. All parents could have an opportunity to buy the used books instead of a limited few. Book return options are managed and paid for by Follett. Follett is within range of the school. It's down here in River Grove, and they have 2 windows of shipping. Shipping's free back and forth. So it is a very feasible option in regard to that. So the shipping costs are limited. Online purchasing enhances the options families have for comparison shopping. And the district's inventory of books would be purchased by Follett. And this is also an effort in the future, something that we really, if we're really ever going to advance to this, is a possible move towards e-books, which is where at least I foresee, is where we eventually want to go in the future anyway, is a possible movement. They have the availability to make that effort possible too, because they do offer that as a possibility. And I think we've had discussions about this, but there's other things we need to do to lay the groundwork before we ever get to e-books. We have some work to do before we get there, but they do have that foundation. It's another piece to be in place so that when we eventually move towards that, we will have that option. We did do a couple of things to kind of lay the groundwork for this, to get some feedback before we came to you. We had a parent survey, which you had an opportunity to see, and we also held a forum with some parents over at York one night and got some feedback from them, and Mr. Wagner is going to give you some information about that.
Good evening. I'm Rob Wagner, Assistant Principal at York High School. As Mr. Hartman said, this is a process that we've been working on really since the beginning of this year after our last book sale process went through. And with the long lines and the cost of books rising, we felt this is something that we need to take a look at. And all this talk about surveys and focus groups is right in line with what I'm going to share with you this evening. So I'd like to just take you through the survey. I know that you had a chance to take a look at it. I'm not sure if you had a chance to go through it. But I'd like to take you through, and I would also like to share with you the findings from our focus group, our parent focus group. And then I'm going to turn it over to Follett because they are the experts in this, and they can explain the process a little bit better. So we sent the survey out. It was a short amount of time that we had to get feedback. We sent the survey out May 4th. We had 4 days of collecting information. We had a great response, and I'd like to thank our community and our parents that did respond because it was very useful information that we, in regards to feedback. We had roughly 604 responses during that 4-day window, which is great. And what is the information that is shared with us? In regards to the big ideas that we're looking for to gather information on were convenience, time, cost, and thoughts on our current practice or process. This slide, slide number 2, talks a little bit about convenience. 37.4 rated our current process as inconvenient, and 33.7 found that it was acceptable. So it's close, but the majority of responses were that it is currently inconvenient. Slide number 3 talks from a time standpoint. 25.3 responses were in line during book sales for 30 minutes or less, which is great. Actually, the feedback that we were hearing was that it was much longer than that. But again, taking a look at the bottom of that, 7.3 were in line for 3 hours or more. And if you're one of those 17%, that's probably the first night that we had early book sales, and that was that 17%. Slide number 4, 48.1% of the people that took the survey have experience ordering textbooks online. This is, the wave of the future. If you have any students or children in college, that's what they're doing. As Mr. Hartman mentioned, that we are going to the digital age, so we're not even into the online process yet, getting to that digital area. But About half of the people that responded to our survey have experience in ordering textbooks online, so that's interesting. Slide number 5, 91.4%. This is a key, I think, to the survey in regards to the overall response. 91.4 would be interested in purchasing a textbook online if given that option. That's overwhelming response. Slide number 6, flexibility and convenience. 44.3 rated flexibility to purchase books at any date and time. Deere and York's on-site book sale would be very important to them. Right now, it's from that convenience standpoint, people can come when they wish. Basically, you're free to come at any time that's scheduled in a 7 or 8 hour window. One of the options that we also talked about was maybe having scheduled times or scheduled slots, which would limit families from work, vacations. They would sign up for it, but you'd have to show up to that time slot or you'd be moved to the back of the line. So convenience is very important. Slide number 7 talks a little bit about the renting as an option, and 69.9% would be very interested in renting for about roughly, and we'll share this with you, 35 to 45% of the cost of the book, and so that's an option. Slide number 8 talks about cost as well. 56.7% of the responses say that initial cost is very important, and we figured that, and cost is just going up. And if you're taking AP courses, books are very expensive. I mean, we never thought books would reach the $200 range, and they're there. So that's expensive. And if you're talking about fees and adding books on, it's something that we have to pay close attention to. Slide number 9 talks a little bit about the manner that books are delivered and returned. And right now, 39.1 of the responses agree that it's important in regards to that process, what that process looks like. The next slide is about options. 67.7 state that it's very important to have options of purchasing new, used, or again, renting books, and that's kind of a theme. I think that renting option is popular. And then the last slide in your packets is about costs. Again, if the prices were the same, right now 81.4% of the people that took the survey would prefer to purchase their books online. I think that's also a key element. So that's our survey. And again, we had 604 responses, and those were from parents of 6th through 11th grade, current parents. Roughly 113 of those, 18.9%, were in the 6th and 7th grade because they did not purchase books. So that's just something to weigh in when you're looking at those survey results. We also had a parent forum last Wednesday on May 4th. I personally invited 20 parents, and I tried to have a good demographic of parents. I had middle school parents from each of our middle schools that were invited. I had high school parents. I also looked at parents that had more than one child. And I also try to look at parents that may have went through the process more than 1 year, meaning if you have twins, that would be 2 children. But if you had a freshman and a senior, that book sale process experience could be different. So I tried to get a good demographic. 14 parents of the 20 showed up on a Wednesday evening at 7 o'clock last week, so I thought that was great. And here are some of the comments that I received back that I'd like to share with the board. As far as advantages, here are the comments that I received back. Thank you for hosting this presentation. I believe it is an outstanding opportunity to automate the process and reduce the cost of books for district families. The rental option is very appealing. I think the online bookstore could be a great way for York parents to save a little money and time. Renting textbooks seems like a great option. I like the link to student schedules. I like the convenience equals happier parents. I see this as an obvious bridge to online educational materials. And the last comment that's an advantage that I received was, I see this as a win-win proposal. I have been a participant on the college level for book rental and it has worked out great. As far as the disadvantages and concerns that parents brought up during this forum, I am worried about shipping costs. Will counselors be able to work out problems with schedules and time for students to order books during the free shipping period? What about a payment plan? Will Follett offer a payment plan without interest? My concern is that we'll begin an online registration for parents in April, and we didn't have this idea in place when we opened registration. So if we were to switch everything to an online for this August, the parents have already registered and would not have known about the changes. I am quite concerned about losing the on-campus registration. It is a great time for parents to ask questions of staff, choose school pictures, pay the rest of their fees, and to buy booster apparel. Personal contact is still very important. That is the feedback that I've received from the parent forum. And at this time, I'd like to turn over to the experts. George Fisher and Ken Leach are here from Follett.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank your district for inviting us in, as well as York. We look forward to this opportunity this evening. I'm George Fisher. I'm Vice President of Sales and Marketing for Follett Virtual Bookstores, and my colleague here is Ken Leach. Ken is our regional sales manager for this particular area, so we thought the two of us would be here to see if we can answer any questions for you. Before we get into the presentation, and I will make it quick, we've gone through details. This is about the second or third, maybe the fourth presentation we've gone through. So we've gone through the operational details with the school and the district in terms of how it works, its functionality, what it means in terms of reporting, what it means in terms of working with your current bookstore operation, etc. We then had an opportunity to talk with some of the parents, and there's where we sort of went through some of the online purchasing experience. So we had some screenshots of what is it going to look like, where are you going to go, how are you going to use your shopping cart, how are you going to get out of it, how are you going to use what we call FlexPay, I'll get into that later, for a scholarship and reduced and free students on financial aid. So we went through all those details. What I try to do tonight is to keep it really short, just to give you folks an overview. So if you've got a detailed question, please go ahead and bring that to our attention immediately. In your packet, we've added a few more different things. These are a few different slides that came up on some of those presentations. The one that you're going to find bound is what you're going to see right here this evening. So just to give you a bit of an understanding, about Follett, we've been in business for quite a few years, 137, 138, formed by the Follett family. I think he started his first bookstore as Charles. We're run by Chuck today, fourth generation, and basically it started out in Wheaton College. We operate 350 bookstores across the nation, and we report into the higher education group. Our overall size, it's a family-owned business. We run about $2.8 billion. The higher education group runs about $1.8 billion of that to $2 billion, and it's really 950 stores that operate on college campuses, as well as the 300 stores or more we operate online, plus we help independently manage stores. So we're well versed in books, and so the core of our business is used, new, and rental. We'd like to introduce you folks to the newest concept in a moment, which is the rental program. It has been a game changer in the industry for book sales and course material distribution. We stock large quantities of books in appropriate quantities, new and used. And I'll show you in a minute our rear grow facility, but it runs about 550,000 square feet. We put about 295,000 titles through there. We ship about 12 million books out of there on an annual basis. So it's well, and it, as I think we pointed out before, it's right around the corner from you folks in terms of our ability to service your needs should we have to. It keeps our cost of shipping down. It also gives us an opportunity to be here quickly to resolve any problems that could arise, or to help the bookstore operation during the back-to-school periods. Our fulfillment options are direct to student and direct to campus. So what'll be the mainstream of this, the backbone of it will be, a parent will be able to order their book during a period of time. It's usually about 4 weeks before class. We open up that window for the bookstore. It continues after that, but for about a month before school operates, or the first day of class, they can go on 24/7, order a book, have it shipped anywhere they want, doorstep. If they're on vacation, if you want it sent to somewhere where it's reliable, where someone's going to be able to pick it up and sign for it, and we don't require that you have to sign for it, by the way. Direct to campus, so right near the end, you're going to have changes of schedule. You're going to have drop ads. You're going to have a bunch of things going on right as they get going. So we've got the ability to either individually or ship on, because we're around the corner, We'll just bring the books here to make sure that the students get the materials that they need for the first day of class. The program that one of the cornerstones of this program is going to be Rent-A-Text. This program was introduced and piloted for about 2 years. We did about 175 schools this year with Rent-A-Text. We saved our parents, our high school parents only, over $1 million in those schools that we launched it this year. For your particular situation, we're looking at variable pricing depending on how long the book is used, the age of the book, and we'll work closely with your academic folks. But anywhere between 65 to 53% of the list price of that book will be the rental fee. And if, you can take that book, you can make notes, you can basically use it just like you would use a used book, just like you'd use a used book if you're using it right now. You have the ability to purchase that book should you want it. And you've also got the option, I'll get into this in a moment too, is to do whatever you want. I mean, what we're saying is it's a parent's choice. If I want to buy nothing but new books for my son or daughter, I can buy new or used books for them. But if I want the rental option, it's there. What we haven't talked about is the digital option. Jeff made mention of it, but that's very robust. We didn't bring it here as a partner. We like to believe that we can help you as you start to take a look at what you want to do with that. So you'll notice there's no digital books here, but we've got that option. They price out just a little bit higher than a rental book. Currently, the publishers are controlling what prices they'll allow the digital rights to go out at. So again, what happens is a parent goes online, they choose the rental option. When you take a look at the actual checkout cart, the website, they'll have a choice of new, used, rental, digital where available. And it's always goes to the cheapest option. The parent can then uncheck and they can go and decide whether they want to buy a more expensive one. They could decide not to buy that book at all should they have multiple folks in the family and they're going to keep that book. So they've got those options to do that. Basically what happens is after they get the book itself, and that's a very easy process, we remind them 4 times. The book is due on such and such a date, the books, and then we detail out what books are there. Remember to bring the books back. Parents, remember to bring the books back. 3rd time, remember the books back, and we give you an actual date. It's usually it would be right around the end of the final exams. We come back on twice to do a rental collection as well as buy used books. We'll bring on this campus, Ken, wait for this size, what do we bring in terms of total people?
We'll probably have about 1 per 100 is the average. And they'll all be equipped with laptops and scanners, so we learn to go very fast.
So we know, and we have lead buyers that take care of that. We'll come back twice and make sure the books and rentals are returned. The 4th email says you forgot to rent your book, and so if you don't bring your rental back, you've now just bought the book, basically. We charge a used book price if you don't bring the book back again. And so that's how it goes with plenty of opportunities. Now, if you don't come back on campus and return your book, you can pop it back in the mail. All you do is go back to the website that you went to, and you get a free shipping label. You put it back in the container, and we pay for the shipping of that rental book to come back to River Grove, the way it works right now. So we also do buybacks. And so, again, as I mentioned before, we've got about a ton of new and used books. We have over 295,000 titles. We like to keep our used book ratio high, which means parents normally want to either rent or use the used book. And that's the core of our business in terms of what we do. Last year we did over 185 buys on our high school. This year we've already booked 300, just over 300. And we gave back just close to $2 million in terms of this year. We're expecting it to be up about 25 or 30%. This is what your website would look like. It's branded to you. It's got all of it's all about you. It's got places for messaging. And again, we won't drill down on it like we drilled down with the parent group, but you'll see that you can leave messages there. Your faculty can leave notes there. Don't sell this book back. You're gonna need it. If you're gonna need it for 2 terms, there's plenty of places for parents to see different. You need a 3-ring binder for this course. Please bring a 3-ring binder. You need a certain other that it's not part of the book. You have options of going in and chatting with the families through some notes as they start to go through and purchase. Your individual classes, your schedules will all be loaded on here. It'll take you to the lowest option. You just go on and you click, yes or no, or you move the condition of book around. So it's very intuitive and very easy to navigate, and it's also secure, by the way. We were recognized as the 55 and top 500 as e-tailers in the nation. marketing to parents and students. We talked about how do you want to let people know. Part of the survey said, how am I going to know? What does this mean to me? And is it going to be easy and there's going to be change? So we encounter that all the time. So basically we sit down when we work with your folks, communications department, and all around your biorhythm, of the most effective biorhythm to communicate the change, to get that out. We would suggest that at this particular time we would not do a buyback for you. We would allow that to follow its due course. That way, it'd be, when you go back, you'd be getting exactly what you were guaranteed on returns. You'd be able to take all those books back in. We would then work to buy those books back from you. We don't know exactly what that would mean in terms of the condition. We're not going to buy all books back. Some of those are rather old. But we normally will come in and do an inventory. As a matter of fact, just finished the inventory for Hinsdale Central this week. We took all the books out of their bookstore and they're back in our warehouse right now. So we would do that for you. Hopefully that cash flow would help offset some of the other expenses for a while that you'd have to incur going through this. And we've got, in terms of our representatives that work with you, we have, the two of us would be primary contact. The primary contact would be Ken, dedicated to you as an account representative. That account representative would work directly with Virginia on a day-by-day, week-by-week basis, and then they would be backed up by inventory analysts. So we've got a whole group that works behind to make sure that that your school is being treated exactly like they should be treated. This is just an idea of what we do. All professional materials. We use snail mail. We use email. Again, whatever your organization finds the most effective way, we will work around that to let parents know what's going on. When you hit the fall, we'll go to workshops. We'll go to freshman orientation. We'll typically go into a lab if you want, and we'll actually work hands-on with parents. We'll pay for a group of, usually your senior classmen if they're that good. We'll bring them in. It's not that difficult, and we'll help parents go through, in terms of what they've got to do to order books. By the way, you can order books online. They can be you've just phoned into to our customer service department. We're open 7 days a week, not 24/7, but it's all Central Standard Time. We've got at this point 38 full-time employees, and you can go on and actually place an order. This group took almost 30,000 calls last August and September. About 15 to 20% of those were ordering books. So we're very careful to help folks order the books and then track them. Of course, once you place your order, you can track it through FedEx, you can track it through the school website, you can track it through the individual campus website. So our customer service will work with parents around the clock to make sure if there's any problems in terms of the customer service. Benefits of a partnership, well, the rental, I think, saves families a lot of money, and that's really what's most important. If this survey you run is not surprising to us, we have our own surveys of families that have already participated. This ranks right at the top. There's three things. There's price, convenience, and affiliation. 61% buy on price. About 13% buy on convenience and availability, about 8 to 10% buy on affiliation. In other words, they want to buy because they're part of the family at York, but they're buying for price and convenience. So we sat down with you and your group and said, look, we'll offer you exactly the same markup you're paying right now for new and used books. It's not our traditional markup, but that's what we're prepared to do here. So that's 22. What you're doing, you're taking a cost of a book right here and marking up 22%. We're going to do exactly the same thing. And we'll give you up to 50% back on a new or used book. The beauty of rental, by the way, is there's no risk of return. So not all books were bought back. I mean, I think we were talking to the York folks, and it's not guaranteed you get that 70% back. If the book's not going to be used next year or it's conditioned, you don't get that money automatically. When you go to a rental, that's it. You pay your rental fee. If the school doesn't use the book next year, really is of no affair of yours or anybody else. You've just paid that very reasonable fee. Free shipping promotions, we understand that's very important, and that would be something that draws people's attention to coming to your site and staying with your site. We think that you can access course materials all in one place from home. We talked about that before. No waiting, no uncertainty of condition of materials. Everyone is entitled to getting a good quality used and a brand new book. We have a standing commitment. If one of your families gets a book that they don't like, they just send it back to us, or they ask for a refund. They keep the book until we send one right away. No cost, no questions. Selection options are populated with the lowest options. I mentioned that. They can return both on campus or prepaid. That's for a buyback as well as that is for your cost of your rental. And I guess for us the key thing is increasing options. for the parents, giving them a lot of time to take care of ordering their materials, as well as when they want them returned and where they want them delivered to. So we think that's a big advantage. And this plays right into the survey that we did, I think, in terms of coming up with the kind of program that we were really trying to develop. I got this. There you go. For the community, for the district itself, I think what we're trying to do is process improvement. So one of the things we focused on is how can we make the process more efficient. And I will not go into that tonight, but there is a ton of things. We've got total integration suite of products. We've got 4 or 5 products that will integrate on an electronic basis with your system should the need be. But basically, you've got a single point of contact. You don't have to deal with all these publishers. We're it. You can eliminate the time and energy in placing book orders, monitoring it, sending back receipts. We buy it, we own it, we manage it for you. So there's cash flow. There's really cash flow, I think, advantages for us to handle that volume of books. I think you folks purchase about $300,000 to $315,000 to $375,000 worth of books every year. Is what the purchase is. And then if you take a look at reducing the cost of automated voucher systems, we basically can track for you, called FlexPay. Again, we didn't go through that, but FlexPay gives you the opportunity to have a payment plan. So a payment plan can go through the school. What we do with the FlexPay is we give each individual student, you give each individual student a PIN. We work with you. When they go onto the website to purchase and they go to the shopping cart, when it comes to what they owe, they can put that PIN number in. In some cases, it's up to you. Each individually loaded, that PIN number can cover all the books in their bag or part of them. So we can do what we call split tender. So you go in, you put the PIN number in, it goes directly, the bill goes to the school, the books go to the student, and then what we can do is they can put a credit card or a money order for the remainder of the payment should the need be. In addition to that, we've got a complete access of reporting. I did not include them. You'll probably see them in your packet. We call it Partner Resource Center. It's an online real-time reporting system, 22, 25 standard reports. We can custom reports if you want. We can even deliver them by email on a regular basis should you really want to see those reports regularly. So that's the way we can help the school and the district in terms of all the transactions of running the bookstore. I would see Virginia playing a key role in monitoring and managing as we go through the year with that system. So we've been in the business 138 years. We're very financially stable, dedicated to driving books down. We deal with over 2,000 publishers. We're the largest purchaser of books at Pearson, all of them. Largest, second only, well, not even second only. Second to us would be Barnes & Noble, I believe. Located less than 5 miles from the high school, and we have great customer service. It's one of the cornerstones of our value proposition, and we believe in some innovative, customized solutions. So we're going to work with you to make sure, which we've started to, that it meets your needs. And I think we're very committed to the right book, the right place, and right on time. So I might sound like the guy that sells American Express here. I'm sorry for running through that. But I think I'm trying to be sensitive to time and what you folks are looking at this evening. So can I answer any questions for you?
Are there any questions of either Mr. Hartman, Mr. Wagner, or Team Follett? Thank you for your presentation. Oh, you're not finished, sorry.
A few more items I need to point out. This kind of leaves us with 3 options. I mean, basically, from the York standpoint, we have 3 things we can look at this point. 1, leaving the bookstore as it currently is. And we know that which leaves us with the high price of books, the limited number of used books, the slow, labor intensive. But the one thing it does is the current bookstore does pay for itself. It pays for the bookstore manager's salary, and it does pay for everything. So it's cost neutral. And as we all know, after this past year, that's very important. So that is something that has to be seriously considered. We can look at taking the current bookstore and buying that scheduling package, which, David, I don't know the exact cost, but it wasn't tremendously expensive, and $1,000 or so, and improving that and scheduling parents in, which would be an improvement. But as I said earlier, it's not a tremendous improvement, and as I said earlier also, it's not the perfect fix or an advance forward, and we're still kind of with this archaic system. Or we can choose the third option, which is go towards the Follett system. So we're kind of looking at that. But we also have to consider when we do the Follett system, and you can refer to page 7 in the packets you were given, the white paper, there are some costs involved in this. And you have to understand that when we go towards something like this, that in this situation, because we're dissolving the bookstore, that the bookstore manager's salary and benefits totaling $63,269 now becomes a district cost. And that the $30,000 in financial assistance provided to the low-income students is also now a district cost. That totals $93,269,000. Now, there is some other factors here that need to be considered. So let's not stop there. I'm trying to give you the whole picture because this is a little complicated. Okay, there's a lot of money flowing back and forth should we pursue this. Okay, so we're at $93,269 that form the salary and benefits of the bookstore manager and the $30,000 from the financial assistance that would be assumed annually for this move. What we would capture back in working capital is $200,000 that are typically used to purchase books and for new books and new adoptions. So we would have $200,000 that we could use possibly to cover her salary for 2, maybe 3 years. And maybe in that process of that short period of time, we could use that. We could figure out something to do with her salary in those 2 or 3 years, something else to do possibly over those 2 or 3 years. Also, you have to consider that York has lost 5 clerical positions this year, and it's not like Mrs. Betteridge wouldn't be able to assume, in addition to assuming the responsibilities as the bookstore manager, dealing with Follett, and there would be plenty of other additional clerical responsibilities for her to assume since we have lost, and again, I'm repeating, 5 clerical positions in our building. Follett also has promised to buy 70% of our current inventory, so there's that money that needs to be looked at that would go, and we would owe $300,000 in credits to our parents, which would basically be a wash between those two. So I needed to get that out so that we were clear about what would happen if we went to the Follett system. Pat, am I missing anything? I hope I made that clear.
No, you made it clear. At least it is to me. You know, it may not be to you, but it is to me. In that, the one thing that we have to express here is there are 2 things that concern us in this. The first being that Follett can't guarantee how much they'll purchase back of our existing inventory. We're going to assume that they're going to purchase quite a bit of it, but they can't because they may have a very large inventory of the books that we're trying to sell back and may not need them. Number 2, they can't guarantee that if our parents buy a book, that they will necessarily need to be able to buy it back because of the same reason. That concerns us. We love the rental option. We love that idea that goes with that. But we would be incurring approximately $90,000 a year or more in costs. And we wanted you to have all the facts as we're looking at this in considering that. So.
Mr. Collins.
Mr. Hartman, you looked at what District 86 does. Did you look at what District 87 does for their textbook distribution?
No, we didn't. District 87 is...
Glenbard.
No, we didn't.
I'd suggest you do that. Say that after school, let me just ask some random questions to everybody. Shipping after school begins, my kid drops a class. I'm going to have an entering freshman at York next year. Kid's going to drop their class. It's, I don't know, when do you allow it to do that? September? What's my shipping cost to ship that book back?
We were looking at that because of the fact that we have considered that. There's a 4-week window to ship, free shipping, during that time. So we had given consideration to, and we talked about more than likely most of the adds and drops occur in the first week. And we thought that if we could begin the window 3 weeks before school and a week in, that should cover most of the adds and drops.
Okay. And if I do that in a period that's not, what does it cost to ship a book? Just give me a ballpark idea.
Yeah, it goes all by weight and distance. You're right next door. Usually it would be $5, maybe less. Depends on how much the package weighs.
Right.
You're looking at about approximately that.
Gives me an idea. The number of used books, is there a guaranteed minimum or guaranteed that every parent can have access to a used book?
There's no guarantee that every parents have access to a used. There's no guarantee that we have access to every parent has access to a used book. On the rental program, every parent is guaranteed to get a rental book, which means whether it's new or used, you get that book. So if I've got to buy a new book and put it into rotation to cover that rental, I'll do that. But on the used program, when you go to the site, there'll be a question for parents. If they opt for a condition that we don't have, let's say it's even a used book, we'll offer them a new book. If they opt for used, we'll offer them new, or vice versa. So while there's no guarantee, we pride ourselves in having a high percentage of used books. If we run a program like this on your campus, given a rental, 63% of your titles are rent eligible. And so if you take a look at the number of used books coming back in, we feel very comfortable that we'll be able to cover the vast majority of used book requests.
Okay. And the price to rent a book versus a new book, can you review that for me?
Yes. Right now, the way we set the price for the rental book, is that we just asked the question you asked?
Yes.
The rental book would be dependent on how long that you want to use the book. So if you're going to a 5-year adoption policy, for books, as an example, that book could go for 35%, would be 35% of what the list would be, because we know we'll use that book 5 times. Okay. And so we actually break even on that book in about 2.5 years. So if you're using a book, let's say only for 3 years, that runs about 47.5%. That's what the model Hinsdale choose, by the way. So that's about a 53% discount. So it depends on how long that you want to use the book and make sure it's used every single year.
Got it. And the length of the contract that you're proposing?
The length of the contract that we proposed here would be a 5-year contract because of the need to drive the price of those books down to 35%.
Okay. I'll let other people ask questions, then I'll reach my conclusions.
Mrs. Hirsch.
I'm going to pick up where you left off, Mr. Collins. And this is probably directed at the high school. When teachers select a book for a particular course, I don't know that those adoptions, when they come to us, are 5-year adoption or 4-year adoption. In fact, one of the classes that we actually get co-credit with COD right now, I have to adopt a new book this year in order to stay current with what COD is offering. I think it's Intro to Business or something. So what is our practice? Historically, in terms of the length of time that we're committing, what percentage of our courses do we actually have a commitment of a 5-year, we're going to use this edition of a book? I'm unaware of that being our practice on a course-by-course basis. It's different in K-8, clearly, but when we get to the high school, I don't have a confidence level or an understanding of what our time commitment is on a course-by-course basis.
As we're going through this process, and Betteridge was part of this, I believe our adoption is somewhere common is 4 to 5 years. That's what's been shared with us in regards to going through this process, that our book shelf life is somewhere in that 4 to 5 year span.
So by entering into this contract, that is going to restrict, are we going to tell a teacher who is teaching a particular course offering that given the current contract that we're in with Follett, we can't change this book for another 2 years?
Excuse me just a moment. Dr. Sullivan?
there will be some courses that we cannot say that for. Example being the dual credit courses that we have to go with whatever College of DuPage says is the text for that event. The other thing that will happen will be advanced placement courses. There will be times when we will have to change a textbook because advanced placement classes require that. So while for the vast majority, I think we could certainly make that commitment. There will always be those exceptions. There would have to be.
When we start the process off, we take a good look at that, and for those books that aren't, then they're not rent eligible, so they won't show up on your shopping cart as rent eligible. We would consider them consumables. That's just how and we price them differently. But yes, that's true. Would there be a used version of that? Yes. But there wouldn't be, if there isn't no, well, 3-year commitment would be the minimum, because what we can do is we could still give you, on that book bag, a 3-year commitment. You could still get, maybe not 35, but we're prepared to give you some level of discount. But for those that you have no guarantee and you're worried about, they're just not rent eligible, we'll work to get you a used book.
Or do you need to add the national program, because that is something they can add that offers a rental
Yeah.
for one?
And there's 2 tiers in the program, national and institutional. The national program is those books that many high schools rent all the time, so we're not even asking for any commitment. So if that book would fall, and the AP books might, because of we have more books on our college list right now than we have on the K through 12 list. So if that AP book fell on the national list for college, then that book is rent eligible, and you wouldn't have to give any commitment at all. That's a good pickup, Ken. But for those that you've got at the K-12 level, we're starting at 3, 4, and 5 years, depending on what grade we would give in terms of the discount.
Go ahead, Mrs. Hirsch.
I just want to make sure I understand how the deal is structured. And basically what you're indicating is that the rental percent, the percent that you're going to charge for a rental, or the discount that you would give for a rental, is going to be basically on a course-by-course, book-by-book determination. So we would not be able to, and again, it's based on our length of commitment in terms of the particular course that we're offering. So in terms of being able to communicate to our parent community in terms of what this rental option is going to be, we're talking now about, I think the ranges that you gave, I'm not sure I have them jotted down in front of me, but, 35, 47 and a half, even higher than that in terms of a discount. We need to be very careful in communicating that, because there are going to be textbooks. My particular kid, I'm making this up, takes 4 AP classes, and the only option for me is to buy a new book, and they're $200 each. So each individual parent's experience is going to be different. So we need to be very careful how we position and explain what offerings are going to be made available.
Yes, I think that's correct. And as you go through it, you can, if you've got a book right now you're unsure of, as we just heard over here for Dr. Sullivan, and basically it won't go on the rent eligible. You'll know right away that it's going to be a newer used option for you. But let's say next year you find another book crops up that has a 2 or 3 year commitment. That's what we would do. So the book list is going to be a living document, and it starts now. And with the one that hopefully you folks normally approve. Once that book list gets approved, we go from there and start choosing on that book list. Okay, what do you want as rent eligible? How many are you going to commit to for X number of years or not? And then that's how we'll give you some the best possible variable pricing we can. Next year, you're going to have that same book bag, and you're going to go through the process again. And hopefully, if the averages hold true from what we've heard in the bookstore, 4 years for a book is not uncommon. And what we're finding in our experience is that the literatures, the Englishes that do tend to go on and on. I think we ran a distribution of your book list in terms of the number. We did find one that was in 1952, I think, and but we'd done a distribution on your book list, and the biggest average is 3 to 4 years old from the edition that you got from the publisher, and we can show you that it's not a standard distribution. It's kind of weighted towards about the 4 year period.
Ms. Masterton.
Just to clarify, so that no one thinks that, oh my gosh, it's Les Jeux sont faits, which is a French novel, and it's a classic. So that's why it was published in 1952. I know French, I actually do. So, and I think the other thing that's really important here to understand is this is not necessarily less costly for either us or for the parents. What it is an option available to them, particularly in the upfront costs and for the operational efficiency for parents in particular in this. the rental and the fact that there are so many more used books than we have is the advantage here. But it is not less costly, and I think that if we express that in any other way, we're wrong to do that, because it is not. They still have workbooks that they have to buy that are non-rentable. They even with the rent, there's still going to be things that they have to buy. It is not necessarily less costly, and we want to be totally upfront about that. And it is, a cost to the district. I also wanted to explain to Mr. Collins the Glenbard 87 issue. The $200,000 that we have in working capital provides us with the ability to buy new texts when we need to. That's not enough for 2,500 students. And so our inventory and our money is not enough. Glenbard had enough to purchase books at one point and continue to do that as we do in the elementary and the middle school, and therefore then be able to rent them out and amortize them over 5 years. But Virginia says 4 to 5 years. We've seen several different texts that have been 3 years or less. And that cost makes it almost, very difficult in our financial condition to be able to afford to have a flat rental fee for high school, and like Glenbard does, unfortunately.
We're committed to keeping the price the same, the structure the same for the consumables that you're experiencing now. That will be the same for the consumables. The advantage, the cost of ownership in some books, you'd be better off to buy it and return it. But the advantages that you're going to see from your survey, as well as the surveys we've taken, parents have to come up with a lot of money. And that book bag, when you take a look at the one I've shown you in the sample, you're going to come up with $153 to rent those books instead of paying $299 to buy them. At the end of the year, when you brought them back, you saved $15. That just happened to be one. Another one we looked at, you can save more. You can save up to $40 or $50 in that book bag. But again, they're not guaranteed of buying them back, and you've got to line up to pick them and line up to get them back. So we're, there's a trade-off there we're trying to play too.
Mrs. Ebner.
Mr. Hartman mentioned that the $93,000, that's a yearly cost. We might have money for 2 or 3 years to cover that, but then what happens after that? Where would that, do we have money? So what would we do then?
It's a cost that we would have to budget for, and, hopefully by the time 3 years passes that, economy is a little bit better, but it is a cost that we would have to budget for or make, consideration of different things. And honestly, there is no guarantee that they're going to purchase. We have $300,000 worth of credits. Here's what happens, and I think you guys know this, but who have kids. Freshman year, parents come in and they have to pay cash, okay, for their books, or pay credit or whatever, but they have to pay. When they return them, they don't get a check back, they have a credit. And as long as the child is to continue to enroll, so sophomore year when they come in, the credit is applied to their purchase of their books. So it is significantly less for them sophomore, junior, and senior year. At senior year, when they graduate, Virginia then sends us a list and we issue checks for everyone. So every year we've got this rolling system going on where the freshmen coming in are paying the money for the books, and then the credits from their return of their books carries forward until senior year, and that's when they actually get kind of the return of the dollars from all of the books that they've returned at that point. And that's the way the whole system works. So right now we have $300,000 worth of liability in terms of having to pay out that. That's something that we're going to have to do if we go to the Follett system. We will have to pay that out. Now, again, we have $200,000 worth of working capital, okay, which is great. So that kind of offsets that a little bit. And hopefully we would be able to generate, enough money to cover that and maybe a little bit more. We just don't, there's no guarantee of that. And we haven't been able to get a guarantee of that. And again, the costs of the $30,000 that we've have down there for waivers is based on a rental of $135 to $150 a year. That's the rental fee. It doesn't include all the things that right now our bookstore revenue covers, which is for anything else that is waived in all of that. It doesn't include any of that, any workbooks, any novels that they have to buy, any of the rest of it in there. So there would probably be a little bit of additional cost. It's not a lot, but it's $90,000 to $100,000 that we would have to absorb each year.
Mr. McDonough.
My question is, is Follett's the only one in this business, or would this have to be competitively bid, RFP, RFQ, something like that?
Okay, so we really have some options here. The first thing is, it is not, because we don't pay Follett, okay? In themselves, the parents are basically paying Follett. It doesn't have to be competitively bid. However, we have not been able at this point to get out there and find out what other things are out there, because the whole, as Jeff said, in the whole timeline, we weren't even looking at anything like this until the article about Hinsdale came up. And that's when it became important to get them in to talk to them. If we want to do this for August book sales, we needed to bring it to you to give you some idea of what it would take in order to do this. That doesn't mean that we're recommending that we do that. We wanted to just get you that information. We have other options. We could say, we're going to use the $1,000 scheduling thing. We're going to schedule it differently. We're going to have it on during the day and expand our book sale time to make it more convenient. And we're going to look at other options. We think, and we're not sure, but we think we might be able to do a rental program ourselves for certain books, at least, to help with that. But we have to investigate more on that. And again, we want to see if there's anything else out there as well. So there are multiple things that, we need to consider in all of this. But our concern and the reason that we brought this to you is because if you wanted a solution to a logistical problem that was pretty much of a nightmare for parents, okay, and if you want an immediate solution to that problem that is an online solution, then Follett is what we would need to go with, because we have no time otherwise in our whole timeline to implement anything else.
Dr. Krizik.
For August.
Mr. McDonough, you ask a good question. The technical answer is you don't need to bid this out. But I believe Hinsdale did their due diligence in this process and put out an RFP, and Follett happened to be the company that met the criteria that was established in their RFP. As we have been conscientious in all of our professional services, we have in the past put out RFPs if we're engaging in something as significant as this. And that is a consideration that the board would have to take into account, because you are entering into a contract. And as was pointed out tonight, they're seeking a 5-year contract. You may be entering into a 5-year contract without knowing what all of your options are. So that Ms. Masterton was correct. Technically, no. But because it's a professional service, it doesn't fall under the lowest bidder. It's those that meet what your criteria is, and that's something to be taken into consideration. The other question, a backward mapping question. At what point in time do the students' schedules and courses have to be finalized in order for there to be this book order and everything put together? Do we know that answer?
We have had some discussions about some alternate ways that they might be able to improve that process. As a cost-saving measure, we did several things the year before last, and one of them was that we reduced a counselor's position during summer school. And we no longer allowed to have a counselor there at summer school at York because it was costly. Instead, what we had suggested, but what had not been followed for good reasons, but had not been followed, was that counselors take one day, they get 7 additional, altogether they get 10 additional days. 3 days at the end of the year and 7 days at the beginning of the year, all the counselors at York to work on schedules, to work on, getting ready for the school year and ending up and et cetera. We suggested that they take one of those days and do some staggering of days availability to work on schedules and to be available for kids during the summer. That was not done last year. They followed again the 3 and the 7, but no counselor in there. That pushed back the timeline for them to get their schedules done. And at this point, because we are now in negotiations, and we can't really talk about anything anymore about any of that, but the same thing still applies. So I can't answer when schedules are going to be done because we're really kind of in the same kind of boat all over again. And maybe Rob can.
Yes, working in student services and working closely with the counselors, we can be more creative with our scheduling. And the way it's worked out as past practice is that all those conflicts hit right at the end of the school year. So we need to have full staff. If a counselor has 280 to 300 students on their caseload, they're getting hit all at once right at the end of the school year and trying to take care of that, those schedule conflicts. And then also you have summer school, you have summer vacation, so everyone's in a rush to get out. Yes, we can be more creative in regards to scheduled counselors throughout the summer. But they were also, the budget cuts happened 2 years ago, so it's been recent that we've been a shortage of counselors over the summer.
Mr. Collins.
I mean, just some conclusions as I've come to as we've talked. As a parent, I find this highly appealing. As a school board member, I'd just like to do a more thorough analysis. I'd like to look at that in-house textbook rental program. I know it takes working capital, but maybe there's some creative ways to finance it. And I'd just like to make sure that we look at every alternative we can before we adopt this. Maybe run this through our EPIRT process and look at all the possibilities and defer this decision until the following school year. However, I would fully support buying that scheduling software and seeing if we can improve, doing our very best to improve our customer service in our bookstore this year.
Mrs. Hirsch.
I'm not quite ready for conclusions yet. I still have some questions. And most of them, thank you for coming. I appreciate it. Most of them are operationally how we're going to look to integrate something like this. The first question I have is, and actually this is directed at the gentleman from Follett. We have someone who is responsibility for the bookstore full-time. What is your experience in terms of the percentage of time of an FTE that you would expect to have supporting in working with you collaboratively to provide services to our students? In other words, do you think that this is a reasonable thing to do for a half an FTE and we could use half of this person's time in other areas? So, when we look at the $93,000 that we're going to carry on cost, that's a staff person, that's an employee of ours who's a valued employee, but we need to look and see if we're reallocating that person to provide other services. So how much of that, what have you seen in terms of the amount of time that we would need to have on staff?
It truly varies with the size of the school. So I've got schools that have 400 or 500 students, and I've
2,600 students at York.
I would say, we've got folks that run about 1,900 right now. That I would say it on an annual basis is probably about a quarter, because it's really condensed around one time of the year. It starts right around February, and it goes right until usually this time of the year when the book lists are finalized. But then there's nothing to do, in terms of the actual book, dealing with it, for the remainder of the year. For this volume, I would say that the challenge would be more around schedule changes, making sure that there's a smooth transition from when the parents have ordered and then we finally sit in class. That'll be the larger challenge, I think, than anything else. But once they've sat in class, you know, you'll have a second term. It's usually not that large. It usually doesn't take a lot of time. And then there's times of the year there'll be nothing at all that you really need to do in terms of communicating with Follett. So, you know, I would say for a school this size, conservatively, half. I think it'll be less than that, but conservatively half.
The second question is, I'm interested in hearing from our high school staff in terms of, I appreciate the 63% of the York books would be available for rental. I'm more interested in 37% that would not be available for rental. And if those categorically fall into the AP courses, if they fall into the consumables, I'm assuming that is not, consumables are not included in that number. I'd just like to hear if we have looked at, I'd like to make sure that the York staff has looked at what that 37% is and what that would look like in terms of a typical student's purchases and what it would look like.
I can say that what is there now, yes, the consumables are on that list, so it's 63% of the total book list we received. There's going to be some books that are going to be some paperback trade books, smaller books that are $12, $15. You're not going to go and rent a trade book. So there's a certain portion of those that are, I would consider consumables, even though, believe it or not, you can buy a used book of, you can sell one back at $12 or $13. Then there's another set in there where the publishers will have certain codes that they use that you need to go out onto the website in order to use their materials. So as a tactic they use, it makes it very difficult for you to go and use that book and rent it without buying that code year after year. And in some cases we will do that. In some cases they won't even sell it to us. So there's a number of books on that list that are not rentable because the publisher makes it impossible to rent. So that's, I mean, in the short answers, that's the three categories you're going to see on your list.
I agree with Mr. Collins. I think we need to do a little bit more looking at the numbers to make sure that we have a good, accurate, complete picture of financially what we're looking at approaching. The other perspective, though, is from the consumer's standpoint, the parent's standpoint. And being a parent of two high schoolers at this point in time, we send out student registrations in the spring through InfoSnap, asking our parents to register their students for school. We use the web store, for encouraging enrollment in or participation in both the PTSA at York, through the music boosters, through the York boosters, and promoting all of those different activities. And there was some concern expressed from the parent focus group in terms of the personal connection and touch and coming to the high school and talking to staff on those kind of things. So adding Follett in another online 3 weeks before school starts and having it be yet another touch to go out to parents, it can appear disjointed. So I'm concerned about the overall approach that we would like to take in communicating with our parents and getting students registered, getting all of the things that they need. And I don't know if there has been discussion or thought about how to package that and to clearly communicate to our parent community what the expectations are. And I would like to see some thought go into how we can ensure that parents don't go, oh, I thought I was already registered. I thought I already did this. And so that from a York perspective, dealing with our customers is something that I would like to see some time and energy put into as well.
Dr. Krizik, I'm hearing that we need a little more looking into this, a few more options. Can we throw this back on your plate and talk about it and see what happens? Perhaps we want to look at a whole host of other things. So there was no action to be taken tonight. Anyway, it was the first time we were hearing about it, and we do appreciate your coming out to share. It's a fantastic idea. It's certainly the wave of the future, but it's $100,000 we don't have right now, so we're going to have to just take a step back and see how that all plays out in the future. But thank you, Mr. Wagner, Mr. Hartman, and Follett for spending all this time with us this evening. Dr. Krizik, it is 10:20. Is there any way we can defer the Lincoln Elementary School project update? Mr. Shu, you sat here all night waiting for this.
He'd actually be happy if we deferred the Lincoln thing. It's 10:20 Central Standard Time. Yes, it is. Two things. The purpose of doing the Lincoln presentation was to try to get all new board members kind of up to date on what was reviewed way back in January, as to lay the groundwork for future conversations. So that certainly can be deferred. There's no sense of urgency on that. That's one thing. The second piece, the other part of the superintendent's agenda was just the ordinance hearing process update, which has been reported in the newspapers and which I have shared with you in writing in terms of an update. So there is no new information, nor do I have anything in writing from Mr. Werner to substantiate the conversations that took place at the meeting a little over a week ago. And so I don't have any new information to share, and so I'm reluctant to maybe have a more in-depth conversation on that topic at this point in time. We do have, some 3 really important action items to come out of closed session. And, what a great orientation for a potential new staff member to realize, what did I just get myself into? I'm now going to be at board meetings that are lasting probably 2 hours than the ones I already go to. So I know you have board communications, but I would appreciate, Mrs. Deroney, if the members of the board could defer those other 2 items on the agenda, and if we could maybe move towards action on those closed session items so we can kind of move forward with some other really important work of district as well.
We will do that, but first I would like to ask for a motion on the superintendent's consent agenda, which consists of the personnel report. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second? Moved by Mrs. Hirsch, seconded by Mr. McDonough to approve the personnel report on the consent agenda. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say no. That motion carries. Our upcoming meetings are simply 2, the business meeting on May 24th and our business and workshop meeting on combined on June 14th. We have a policy meeting coming up to which we've all been invited on, did you say June 9th? June 7th. I think it was indicated to be the 9th, but it is the 7th. Tuesday the 7th. You said June 9th.
Tuesday of that week.
I think it's June 7th.
I think if the 15th is a Tuesday, then it couldn't be the 7th. Is Tuesday June 7th? Okay, June 7th.
June 14th is a Tuesday.
Okay.
It is now almost 10:30. We don't even know the calendar. June 7th on the policy committee meeting. And that will be, we typically start those at 7? And it will be here at the district office. Coming out of closed session, is there any other board communication? Wait a minute, where am I? No, action on closed session items. Here we go. We have 3 items to act on tonight. Is there a motion on any of them? Mrs. Hirsch.
I will start with the first thing that is listed on our agenda, reduction in force under employment of employee. I move that the Board of Education adopt the resolution entitled Resolution Authorizing Notice of Honorable Dismissal of Certain Educational Support Personnel.
Is there a second? Seconded. Moved by Mrs. Hirsch, seconded by Mrs. Stufen to adopt the resolution authorizing notice of honorable dismissal of certain educational support personnel. All those in favor say aye. Opposed say no. That motion carries. Mrs. Hirsch?
If I could just ask, you were very quick on the vote there. Dr. Krizik, if you could just give a quick explanation as to what this is. We did most of our reduction in force notices earlier in the month or last month, and I just wanted to explain what this one was.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Hirsch. In reviewing all of the support staff reduction in force honorable dismissals from last month and going back over that list, Mr. Carlson and Mrs. Whalen identified that there was one additional position that needed a reduction. And so the person that is associated with that role has been identified, or related to that role has been identified. So this is just really part of the normal process. And legally, we are required to give support staff 30 days notice of a reduction in force prior to the start of a school year. We are a much more proactive school district that does not want to wait to the very last minute to let people know that they may not have a position for next year. So we have a tendency to do that during the school year. So this is just, it should have been included 2 weeks ago. It wasn't. And this is just completing that whole reduction process.
Two other items out of closed session. We need a motion that the Board of Education approve the appointment of Mr. Christopher Welton as the Assistant Superintendent for Finance and Operations effective July 1st, 2011. Is there a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Collins. Is there a second? Seconded by Mrs. Ebner to approve the appointment of Mr. Christopher Welton as Assistant Superintendent for Finance and Operations. Is there any discussion? Mrs. Hirsch.
We had an opportunity to meet Mr. Welton just quickly during our closed session, and we're thrilled to have you join our district. Thank you very much for staying this late in the evening. We are very much looking forward to having you join our leadership team at the table. I would say that this board is very engaged, involved, has lots of questions, so get that little microphone hand ready. You'll be answering lots of questions, but welcome to our district. We're very thrilled to have you join us. Thank you very much.
Any other discussion? Mrs. Walsh, could you call the roll, please?
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mrs. Ebner? Yes. Mr. McDonough?
Yes.
Mrs. Stufen?
Yes.
Mr. Bloom?
Yes.
Mrs. Droney?
Yes.
Mrs. Hirsch?
Yes.
7 ayes, no nays. That motion carries. Welcome, Mr. Welton. We're happy to have you. Mr. Collins.
I move that the Board of Education approve the appointment of Mr. Charles Johns as Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction effective July 1st, 2011.
Is there a second? Been moved by Mr. Collins, seconded by Mrs. Stufen to approve the appointment of Mr. Charles Johns as the Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction effective July 1st, 2001. Is there any discussion? 11. Go ahead, Mrs. Hirsch.
We also had an opportunity to meet Dr. Johns, I believe it is, in closed session. Unfortunately, he had a family obligation he needed to go to, so he's not able to join us here this evening. But I think we are all just as thrilled about this new cabinet member and looking forward to his leadership as well on our leadership team. So,
thank you. Mrs. Walsh, could you call the roll, please?
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mrs. Stufen?
Yes.
Mrs. Droney?
Yes.
Ms. Hirsch?
Yes.
Mr. McDonough?
Yes.
Mrs. Ebner? Mr. Bloom?
Yes.
7 ayes, no nays. That motion carries as well. Welcome to Dr. Charles Johns, who we hope is home, where we'd all like to be. Is there anything else, board communications? Anybody? I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Is there a second? Moved and seconded to adjourn. All those in favor say aye. Opposed say no. Thank you.